Okay, I have a few things I'd like to say without reading about what's going to happen tonight. The first, as far as what's on your packet, the first thing I'd like to say is that I believe there's a consensus on this board that we should move our meeting times to 7:30, whether it be an action meeting or a work session. So as board president, I'm going to take that initiative to announce to the public that from now on, all our meetings will start at 7:30, whether it be an action meeting or a work session. That's the first thing I'd like to talk about. I'd like somebody to turn this down a little bit too or something. It's getting too much feedback. Okay. Next, I'm going to go on to read the cover sheet. We are going to readjust adjust the program so we can accommodate the students that are here tonight that have taken their time to come out to be recognized. So I'll go ahead and read the cover sheet. Our meeting tonight consists of two separate meetings. First, we will conduct a brief official public action meeting, but before we do that, we will present proclamations to outstanding students. Following the special action meeting, we will have a public work session where the board will hear a variety of reports and have discussion regarding topics which may be scheduled for official action at a future meeting. During this meeting, we will not be voting or making the final decision on any topic. Questions and comments by members of the audience will be limited to those topics on the agenda for this meeting. Tonight we will present, I already read that, tonight we'll present proclamations. This meeting is being videotaped for community cable channels. Individuals attending this meeting and intending to speak to the board should be aware that they are being videotaped. In order to meet the requirements of Pennsylvania Sunshine Law, it's necessary to record the names of all citizens who speak to the board during the meeting. To assure compliance with this requirement, it's essential that those planning to address the board come to the microphone and state not only their name but also their address. Members of the audience are asked to limit their questions and comments to no more than 3 minutes. This limit will permit time for all of those who wish to speak to the board. Whenever members of the audience exceed this time limit, the board president may ask the individual to yield the microphone to the next speaker. So I'd like to recap that real quickly and short. We're going to do the proclamations first, then we're going to move into a special action meeting. That special action meeting will consist of questions and possible voting, but since it's a special action meeting and not a regularly scheduled action meeting, questions from the audience will be limited to only what's shown on the agenda. Then that will be followed by a regular work session, which we will have questions from the audience, again, on what is on that agenda. In saying that, I turn it over to Mr. Ware and Mr. Bartle to present proclamations.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight we've invited the young women who represent the North Penn High School girls water polo team to come. Those in the audience who were here last month and those here at the table who were here last month will remember that we recognized the young men of North Penn High School and the water polo team participants last month, and we announced at that time that we would be inviting the young ladies this month. So I'd like to invite the coach, Bill Bartle, and I believe the assistant coach is here also tonight. Is that right? And her name is Denise Junos. Did I pronounce that correctly, Denise? Junos? Yes. Junos, thank you. I would like to read the proclamation that is going to be presented to these students for their endeavors. The proclamation names each of the young ladies, and the opening remarks are generic. Whereas many North Penn School District students individually and collectively perform distinguished service to their school in many activities, and whereas the reputation and image of the North Penn School District is built and enhanced by the performance of its faculty and students, and whereas the accomplishments of individual students in academic, artistic, athletic, leadership, literary, and musical endeavors bring positive community interest in school programs, and whereas the future of any community rests in the hands of its responsible youth, then these young women are named and their accomplishment is cited. Coach Bartle, will you invite the team members to come and stand behind the board at this table?
I'd just like to
Thank
say
you.
these young ladies placed second at the state water polo tournament held at Governor Mifflin, November 3rd and 4th. Now I'd like to introduce them. Laura DiLuigi. Andrea Dobes. Angela Dobes. Catherine Geddes. Lindsay Jernigan. Kristen Grail. And Kristen was named to first team All-State. Denise LeBold. Eve McCarney. Melanie McManus. Heidi Mulvey. Katie O'Brien.
Katie, congratulations.
Susan Shriver. And Susan was named to second team All-State. Jessica Thomas. And Andrea Umlauf.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
A round of applause.
Thank you, Coach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Denise.
Give him another minute or two to head home. Okay, I'd ask the audience and board members would turn to the special action agenda. I'd like to talk on this briefly before we move into this section of the meeting. If we all look at item number 2, as board president, I'm going to take the initiative and move item number 2 into the board committee meeting. That is going to become part of our work session. I've had some phone calls from some board members. I've had some discussion with Dr. Bose, and I've also had discussion with Vice President Mengel, and I would say that Dr. Bose, Ms. Mengel, and myself agree that this part should be moved into the work session because there could be quite an amount of discussion on this. And in saying that, before we move on to item number 1, I'd just like to poll the board to find out if anyone has a problem that I do that.
No, that's fine.
Okay, in saying that, again, I'll repeat, item number 2 is going to move into the work session of our agenda. So now I'd like to come back to item number 1, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Bose.
I think it comes as no secret to the community that a significant number of the members of the Board of Education have taken a public position on whether or not our community should support and finance the construction of a second high school. And I think we all know the answer to that because during the campaign and during all the campaign-related activities, these people were forthright and candid about their preference. So obviously, without a recommendation, this item comes up for the Board of Education to consider as to what its pleasure or its decision may be regarding the decision previously made to build a second high school.
Thank you, Dr. Bose. Okay, is there any motion to get topic number 1 started? I believe there is.
Yes, Mr. President, after 4 long years and with great pleasure, I move that this board cease and desist on all planning activities regarding the construction of a second high school, so located on Keenest Road in Montgomery Township.
I second.
Okay, there's been a motion made by Ms. Mengel and seconded by Mrs. Scher. I now open this up for questions and comments. And I'll do the best to field questions. I'd also like Dr. Bose to field questions. Well, Art may have to, I would like it for Art's expertise on where we are with Mr. Breslin and his contract. So many questions. I think what I'd like to do is open it up. We'll open it up to this side first, and then we'll work over to that side. So whoever wants to go first on this side.
I would just
Pat?
I would just like to know where we are in terms of progress. According to the copy of the contract I received over the weekend, see it's broken down into 5 different phases: schematic, design, construction, bidding, and construction. And I would just like to know where we are at this point. In my attending the meetings and information I've been able to receive in the past year, I have not seen any kind of documentation or updates, and I think that there should be something forthcoming somewhere that the board should be aware of, just where we are at this point in time. If that's possible.
In terms of the architect fees? In terms of fees, you mean?
Yeah, well, in terms of fees, but also in
Fees
terms of
outstanding.
progress, where we are. I mean, the last copy I got was an invoice we paid in October. Now, what have they been doing for November and part of December? They continuing to just go full bore, or just where we are? I was under the impression that this thing was at one time or another put on hold or whatever, pending the outcome of the election, or there might be a change on the board.
Well, I'd
And
like to
found out
clarify.
perhaps that hasn't happened.
I'd like to clarify one thing. I do believe that did come up at a meeting or 2 ago, whether it was last month or the month before. To the best of my knowledge, nothing had been put on hold. Sure, there was some casual conversation that I had with Art, with other board members had with Art, as far as where Mr. Breslin was, but as far as officially being put on hold, I want to clarify to the community, to the best of my knowledge, nothing was officially put on hold. So I'll turn to Art and ask Art to really, between Art and Dennis, bring us up to the date to the best of their knowledge.
Mr. President,
Yes.
before you do that, I would prefer that, so we don't get redundancy here, if there's other boards got questions, so Art Wood can address those all at one
Yeah, it
time.
doesn't
Oh, okay, okay.
I have some questions that kind of correlate with Mr. Mosey's questions.
Okay, well, let's stay on this side, and then we'll come over to that side. Okay, Pat, any other questions?
The other thing, and perhaps this can be addressed to Dennis, when I asked for copies of invoices, I see that we had, there was a total of 7 installments paid. There was also a feasibility study made, And the only copies of invoices I got were the last two, one dated September 1st and one dated October 1st. And I think it's incumbent upon us to notify the public as well, just, you know, it might just be a matter of procedure, but I think they should know just what these fees were for, what these invoices were for, because some of them are substantial.
Okay, we'll come back. We're kind of creating.
That's all that I have, Mr. President.
Okay, any other questions from over on this side? Dave?
I have no questions, but I have some remarks I'd like to make following the information that's going to be provided.
Okay. Sharice?
Okay, yes, Mr. Clements, I do have a significant number of questions in regards to the architect's AIA contract. I requested that a copy of the contract be provided to myself, and it was, as you know, included in each board member's packet. I requested a copy of the contract because I had attended the financial audit meeting with Mrs. Shear last week and was told that the architect had been paid approximately $60,000 for the last 2 months of work on the second high school. Knowing the status of the application, I had some concerns about the fact that he was drawing so much money during the Plan Con document phase. So I asked for a copy. Upon receiving the copy, and I guess I should interject at this time that I do have previous experience with AIA contracts, having been a planning commissioner before moving here. And what stood out the most to me in the contract was that the architect is drawing a 40% portion of the total contract during the document phase. And to be quite honest with you, I found this to be quite exclusive, and I've never seen an AIA contract where 40% of the total contract was being received during the document phase. So I did call around to some of the board members this past weekend and had an opportunity to meet with Mrs. Perkowski on Saturday. And I showed her this contract in hopes that she could answer some questions for me. And she informed me that she, in fact, had never seen this AIA contract prior to me showing it to her over the weekend. I then called Mrs. Shear and Mrs. Mingle, and they too informed me that they had, in fact, had never seen this contract. So this morning, I called Mr. Weir and I asked for a copy of the resolution which approved this contract, and I stopped in this morning. Was not provided with a resolution because there was none, which was approved by this board. I have a copy here before me of the action agenda from January 20th, where it states specifically, and I will quote, "An AIA contract will be prepared by Charles Potash for school board review and approval." Ladies and gentlemen of the board, this was never done. I call into question not only the validity of the contract on the basis that we have now paid $500,000 for a contract, but I'd like to know why the solicitor isn't here tonight to ask directly why, in fact, this contract was not brought before the board, who was sitting in January of 1994, for their review and approval. And I think the most significant thing, besides that, if that's not significant enough, was the fact that this contract, in fact, was signed by the board secretary and not the board president. And I personally, as a board member for this school district, feel that any contract of this amount of money should absolutely have the board's president's signature on it and should have been brought before the board for full review and approval. And I challenge its validity. I challenge the legality of it. I believe there has been a definite violation of the Sunshine Act because it was not approved. And if that isn't enough, I will support the motion on the table tonight, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, staying on this side, Mrs. Mangle, we're going to
No.
put the questions on the floor. And
No
then we're
question
gonna
at
come
all.
back. Okay, let's go over to this side. Shelley?
Went down the, going this way?
Okay, we'll go this way, that's fine.
I'd like to say, when I saw the AIA, I was very stunned. I knew I hadn't seen it before. If I have a reputation for anything, it's good retention. I also remembered the motion, and there was some controversy over the naming of an architect at that stage. It was my understanding that we were looking for an introductory service of drawing up a feasibility study, and quite frankly, any commitment that would have come after there was a formal approval of the actual construction of a second high school, which didn't happen until March of this year, over $217,000 into the billing. I too was stunned too by the auditor. When talking about the depletion of our bond funds and the deficit that we're facing there, it was mentioned that we were also dealing with $60,000 a monthly fee, which was essentially a retainer for simply maintaining him as the architect of record. That was very upsetting to me, because I wondered, why weren't we told? And why wasn't this board notified that while we were in limbo on the second high school, there was a very expensive meter ticking, and perhaps some other advisement should have been forthcoming. I'd like to know, for the feasibility study that was done on the expansion of the high school, which amounted to $23,000 up against $538,000 invested in the planning for the new second high school. Was there an AIA done for that building? Now, we received 2 packets of plans, both which have drawings, both of which are all that I have, almost equal documentation for both projects. But one ran up a bill of $538,000 with a long-term financial commitment to this district, while the other went without an AIA. If we could have done that to get drawings and a feasibility report for an expansion project, why couldn't we have gone that route and awaited the commitment of an AIA until after there was formal approval of the second high school by the board? These are when we come back to this, that I'd like to hear what the explanation is, given the fact that we have almost equal information, we as board members, on both plans. And I also have talked to Dennis about the purchase orders. I did call today, Mrs. Krieger, and Dennis has told me that all of the purchase orders related to these expenses, given us itemized cost listings, will be brought to us, and we'll be receiving them shortly, so that one's already been resolved. I'll let Don go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess my questions are more specific. Being familiar with contracts, I see that the contract, the phases, as it was laid out, the schematic design phase and the design development phase, which paid 35% of the contract, which amounted to $533,000, has been completed and paid for. My question will be related to that, and there was payments made over the course of the contract that amounted to that to those dollars, and the contract allotted that progress payments could be made to the contractor over that period of time that amounted to that amount of dollars. I assume, and just one confirmation, Mr. Wood, when you have a chance, is that that all of that work that was done is in our possession, or we know where it's at, and you had reviewed it as these processes were being made, and those payments were made accordingly as needed with this contract. Just for the audience information, there was another, as the contract allotted, there was another $5,000 for reimbursable expenses, which is part of the contract. So $538,000 has been expended to complete phases A and B. The question I have related to that, I noticed the last invoice from the contractor that paid up the totals of the first 2 phases was dated October 1st. It is now the middle of December. Has the contractor incurred any additional expenses on phase 3, the construction document phase, October, November, and December? Are we going to see some additional billing from here that, or did the work cease with the October 1st billing? That's the question. That is, and I see that the contract, if I was the architect, he has a signed valid contract, so I think that whatever that is, I think that we have obligation to pay him, or where we are on that. And that, those cover my general questions related to this contract.
Hey, Bill? John? Okay, now let's give Art a chance.
I will try to remember the many questions you asked. First of all, in relationship to you having a copy, after we discussed the contract in January, Mrs. Mingle asked for a copy of the contract as it was revised. I have in front of me a confidential board memo that went to Dr. Elko showing that Board Liaison Tom Clemens, facility dated February 7th, 1994, topic or issue, AIA standard form of agreement between owner and architect. Discussion summary, attached for school board review is a proposed copy of the AIA document B-141, standard form of agreement between owner and architect. Mr. Potash, Mr. Breslin, and I have spent considerable time structuring this agreement. We're all confident that as it is presented in this form, it will serve both parties well as we begin the 46-month relationship required for this project. We would encourage any questions regarding this agreement and will place it on for approval on the agenda of the February 17th, 1994 action agenda or meeting. That was signed by Dr. Elko. It went to Dr. Elko. I made the assumption that it was distributed. I mean, that was my normal process. Here's the document, the form, and everything else that I used to do that. So if you didn't get it, it was certainly my intention. Discussed it with Tom. He was my liaison at the time.
When did that switch from me to Bill?
Well, after that, I think,
Right.
because this was February 7th, 1994. That was the beginning of the process.
I remember getting that, I remember discussing it with you, but I also remember that the cover sheet you had attached, and I assumed that all board members received that.
Well, it was certainly
That's it.
directed to all board members and copied to Mr. Potter.
Was it initialed and numbered by the
It was
superintendent?
initialed 16-94 AGE. So, that was
We
my
should-
responsibility.
We should all find that in our notebooks.
Because I remember specifically, and I'd have to go back and review the
We have
tape,
tapes.
that you asked to see the contract in January.
Because it wasn't provided that evening as
That's
usual.
right. And this contract, if you look at it, is only signed by Breslin.
Right.
So that was the beginning of the work that had been done. Following that, and help me with your questions if you will, because there were many of them, we began the process after you approved the contract. We went through the schematic drawings initially. We have those drawings, and quite frankly, in response to Mr. Hill's question, we have a set of drawings that could almost build the building, and that's the next phase. You will not see additional building because we reached a point, and I went to Dr. Bose, and we both agreed that it was prudent at that point to wait until after the election, because the next phase, before we went into construction drawings, required some board action on acceptance of plan copy. So we did not, together, feel that it was appropriate at that point, since we were in the month of October, to bring that forward. So there will not be additional expenditures. I do have a set of drawings. I can't tell you, Don, without looking at them, maybe 28 pages that involve the structural engineer, the mechanical engineer, and it is a building. Now, at that point, we would begin the discussion that we had agreed to begin if the process was continuing to involve the board. There were meetings with Dr. Bond. There were meetings with the Department of Education. We visited other sites to look at food courts and new concepts for dining, or serving in dining rooms and so forth. There was a lot of work that went into the process.
Well, you've answered my question. You have the drawings, you're confident the work was done, and we've paid the contractor $153,000, whatever that is, up to that phase, and that there will be no additional charges coming.
No additional charges.
That's fine.
I even went back to Dr. Bose, and we both had a discussion with Mr. Breslin about what additional charges would occur. He made it abundantly clear nothing can occur without board approval. I can't go to the next phase. So that's where we were at that point.
Is there a cancellation charge?
There is no cancellation charge. I made a telephone call as per Dr. Bose's direction the other day and told him that it was apparent that this evening the project would cease and desist, and I would follow up with a letter tomorrow to that extent. And I don't know, what questions am I missing at this moment?
Can I add one, Art? Was there charges incurred for the development of the feasibility study for the expansion of the current high school in those charges?
Feasibility study, you know, one of the things I've always understood is that I work for someone, and I respect that. And Dr. Persing directed in cooperation, and I think we had some discussion about an addition, directed Mr. Breslin to do the feasibility study.
We had a board vote on it.
But part of,
I think we did have
We had a board
but
vote
part
on
of
it.
these costs,
We had
part
a
of these
vote.
total costs that we're talking about include that feasibility study? In these costs?
yeah.
That's $24,000 additional,
That's
making it
broken out.
562 as a total.
Right.
That's broken out.
538.5 was for the for a new building.
Okay.
We also had, we incurred some expenditures. We needed to, if you recall, Mrs. Scher, you had a concern about the placement of the building in lieu of the floodplain and wetland. We redefined that. Not that that was a large expenditure. I do have that, and I could share that with you. But we did go back and we did that. We had the Erwaller and Walter survey, which we needed to design the building. And we used Erwaller and Walter because they initially had done Mr. Cutler's survey, and we knew in getting quotes on that they were just going to be so much less expensive because they had established an awful lot of the information on the property.
Did their billing come under the Breslin-Lydiard billing, or was that a
Well,
separate billing?
their billing,
Was there
if
a
you look
separate
at a
billing?
breakout, Erwaller and Walter, initially, we had an expenditure with them of $9,500. We had a wetland and floodplain study, and those things are all in the total expenditure of $549,000, which,
Dennis, is that correct? There are no other vendors associated with the second high school?
there was,
It's all under
we did at one point, we had such abuse on the property that we did have a $650 expenditure with a local fence person to put gates at the one driveway, and, you know, nothing other than things that we had to do to protect ourselves. I mean, it's not there are no other hidden expenditures, if that's your question.
So what's the number? With the feasibility study of the addition to the second high school, are we at five what? You know?
Well, we're we're at 562, 357.
Okay, and if, from the Plan Con, right here, I think the estimate that Breslin's architectural fees were gonna be were about somewhere between 1.6 and 1.8 million total. Is that a fair?
Yeah, Mr.
estimate?
Breslin's billing, if you look at it, and I have all of it here in front of me, all of the bills, you only received a couple, but he was taking the cost of the building, which is 27,712,000 plus the on-site improvements, which he would pay. For an example, he was directed, if you look at his contract, to use Biro and Associates for his mechanical contracting work, Dirk Edson for site work, and as a result of that, he would collect his fee and they would be subcontractors to him. He had numerous subcontractors. He had structural engineers, he had the mechanical engineer, and he has since paid those folks out of his fees that he received from us.
Art, I have one question that I assume Dr. Bose did follow through and look for legal advisement as far as the termination of this contract, that no actions here would have any financial impact on the district. Is that correct?
Well, we can certainly, we should check that with our solicitor, but I know that our solicitor and Mr. Breslin's attorney, Mr. Breslin regularly said to me, Art, I am in between a rock and a hard place. I know, I think, and I even came to Tom immediately after the primary election and said, where should we be going with this? I mean, the day after.
Right.
And every time I talked to Bob Breslin, he was quick to say, I've talked to my attorney, and here's the position I'm in. I'm liable if, after the general election, for some unknown reason, this community decides to go ahead with a second high school, and I say, well, I haven't done anything. You know, I've arbitrarily stopped the process. So he was regularly talking with his attorney, and I believe his attorney had conversation with Mr. Potash, and as per this contract, he proceeded to a point where we could not go any further without coming back and getting board approval.
Okay, but my question was also, if we have the ability to terminate now, given the fact that $322,000 of these charges came in after the May primary, and while our questions were...
Contract clearly states that he has progress payments to the job until he gets official notice to stop work.
Well, that's my question, Don. If in fact the board had taken action to officially shut down the project, was the opportunity there to have put a halt to these charges that came forward since the primary?
Absolutely.
And that's where the concern is, in that information and that aspect of the discussion never occurred. In other words, no one said that this is what we're weighing here in continuation.
We were working on a vote that we had. It wasn't my responsibility to come forward and suggest that we needed 5 people to stop the project.
Right.
I had a conversation with my liaison person and with Mr. Clemens at that point, because I had a concern. I mean, I happen to be a conservative person, that's no secret. And I just didn't want to continue if we shouldn't continue, but that's not my decision.
Well, perhaps the debate would have had a little bit more weight on the side of officially closing down temporarily until there was clear direction from the board, rather than if there was consideration for
The
these charges.
bottom line is past is past.
Right.
And the bottom
Now we
line
have to
also
move
is I
on.
talked with Art and I had many conversations during the summer. And I believe my comment always to Art was, Art, we have an obligation to Mr. Breslin. The majority of this board is, the direction is to move forward with this contract, move forward with the building of the second high school, and we really don't do anything until we sense that there's a majority that wants to change direction. So therefore, in my opinion, we have an absolute obligation to Mr. Breslin for the services that he's rendered, and that's why we're here tonight on this issue.
He reminded me regularly that he had a 9-0 vote initially for his contract back in February.
No.
We never
That is
voted
not
on the
correct.
contract.
We couldn't
We
have.
voted to name an architect pending, and then the rest of it was dismissed for the contract to be brought forward for
Is it not a
approval.
motion to,
I'm
No,
not
we did
sure.
not
I don't
approve the
remember that
contract.
well.
It never followed through.
Mr. Wood,
Let's keep it, hold on, one person at a time. Mrs. Krieger?
When I came in today, I asked that question of Mr. Weir specifically, and even though you have the copy that you provided to Mr. Elko, or to Dr. Elko, for placement on the February 17th, 94 agenda, that item never made it to that agenda, and the previous board never voted on the AIA contract. Therein lies my dilemma as a current board member. I challenge the validity of the contract to begin with,
is that correct?
because this board did not vote, or the previous board did not vote on it.
Exactly.
I have a signed contract, I don't,
Well,
You can ask
by
the
whose
legal
authority?
side, you can ask the legal attorney, but we have a signed contract signed by an officer of the school district.
Ken?
And
Give Ken would like the floor.
he's still an officer of the school district.
I wish I had some of this conversation this morning, which I didn't have. I think we need to look at the agenda for the February meeting. You'll recall, Sharice, that this morning I said that the AIA contract was attached to the February minutes, not the January minutes.
That's correct.
You and I did not examine the February agenda. You perhaps assumed that I did, but I did not.
No, that's not correct, because I asked you specifically, Mr. Ware, was action taken at the February meeting on the AIA contract? And your response to me was, I don't believe there was action taken.
That's not my recollection exactly like that, but that's beside the point. I think we need to
No,
look
that
at the
is the
minutes. Well, that may be the point as your memory from this morning's conversation, but I think we need to look at the minutes for the February meeting and the agenda for the February meeting. We might find that there was a second vote in February that I need to bring to light now. I think we should have the minute books, Mrs. Tatum, if we can.
Because when I initially called in this morning, my question to you was to provide me with a copy of the resolution approving the AIA contract. And when I came in, you gave me the action agenda from January 20th. You gave me the work session agenda from January the 11th with a
Green sheet that supported it,
green sheet that
and I gave you,
described
and I gave,
basically what had transpired up to that point on the architect selection. But I was not provided with any information, and I understand that you are a member of the school board, but I have seen other contracts, other resolutions that are signed specifically by the board president. And I just found it very perplexing that a contract of this magnitude would have been signed by the board secretary, not the board president. So therein my dilemma. So, I mean, it would be helpful had I been provided those minutes, like I asked for this morning.
well, we may find that there is nothing in the February agenda, and we may find that there is. That's the new light
That's
that
correct,
needs
but
to
if
be
there-
shed to the
But
conversation.
if there isn't, then my question is, do we
Remains the
have
same.
a valid contract with this architect? And if we don't, then we need to proceed and find out what our recourse is to recoup some of the monies that we have paid out.
Can I add one thing? Ken, please? Because you're talking about the February agenda. The date of the agreement was the 20th day of January.
Right.
So if in fact it did come before the board, it came after the fact, if it's in the February agenda
But
for
what
approval.
happened was, that's when we had a request specifically for you folks to see the contract.
And that was from Don.
Should have been
That was from
agendized.
Donna,
Donna.
because Donna said, henceforth, on a contract of this nature, we need to review it.
So you would say that if we were to ask for a contract to be presented before we approve it, someone will go as an officer of this board and sign a contract and then give us a copy of the contract later?
No.
Well-
If you follow, and if I'm right, and I may be wrong, when you look at the February, if this document that I prepared for Dr. Elko through Mr. Clemens, dated February 7th, fulfilled the request that I had from Ms. Mangle to examine the contract prior to execution. And then I said specifically, we encourage any questions regarding this agreement and will place its approval on the agenda for February 17th, 1994 action meeting. I can't believe that we didn't act on it.
But the dates are in February. I'm saying that as of the 20th day of January, it says this agreement made as of the 20th day of January. And so the commitment was already made even by any of those dates that are there, seeking,
I understand that.
and I thought we would be
The agreement was then finalized by Mr. Potash, Mr. Breslin, and his attorney. And that agreement was finalized on the 20th of January. But if you look at the copy that I originally had, dated the 20th of January. It is only signed by Robert Breslin.
You're saying, I think you're saying is that the original date was January the 20th. However, it was not signed at that point in time. It was signed after the February meeting?
After the February meeting, when there were no changes, we requested.
And you never changed the date on the contract?
And we never changed the date on the contract because the contract didn't change.
There's no dates under the signatures traditionally.
No.
Something like this, I'm surprised it's not notarized. I'm
That's what
I'm
surprised.
surprised AIA does not have a date space on their contract, but they don't.
Okay, Ms. Mengel?
I just want to note that separate and apart of whether we have a properly executed document, we do have product for work rendered by this firm, which would in fact obligate us to some extent whether we did everything right from here. So
We're
while
not voting on
board
payment.
secretary's out getting the documents, we still have.
Can I move that we move forward with the motion, because we're not making a motion to pay anyone right now. We're making a
Right.
motion to cease
Right.
and desist so that we have no further payments on an obligation, so I will.
I would yield that we should
sure.
open it to the
Absolutely.
audience of citizens.
Well, I still had some
Consider that.
comments.
And yes, Mr. White said he had some comments to follow up after we asked our questions to Mr. Wood. So, is everyone satisfied to this point with the responses that we've received from Mr. Wood? Hearing nothing.
Mr. Clemens, I have one more
Okay.
question, if I may, sir. This is directed to you, Dennis. On the copies of the invoices I got, or I received, excuse me, I noticed down at the bottom, there's a pencil under PO number, ASN number, 92 bond. Is that bond, 92 BOND?
Yes, it is.
What does that refer to, please, sir?
The 1992A general obligation bond, of which that's where this money is coming from.
So we took out a bond 2 years before we approved the high school, or to go forward with plans on high school.
To be perfectly honest, I put this expenditure in the same category as the land. We're expending money that wasn't necessarily borrowed for this purpose.
How much
It's been
was
awarded-
that bond for, sir?
It was $25 million.
And we've actually paid Breslin out of two bonds, the 90 and the 92
Right.
bond.
What was the 90 bond for, sir? You recall, please?
The 90 bond was
Top
for
the
the building of
Right.
Gwinnett Square Elementary School,
Right.
and some work at Penndale and Pennbrook and Penfield.
So we had money left over out of that 90 bond that could go toward this?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
It's kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Right, I'm
It's-
asking you that.
Yes, and that's what's
What
going
was, you recall at the top of your head what the total 90 bond was?
27.5.
27? And obviously, we did not spend all that money, so we had funds to apply to this 25 million for the 92 bond. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, and in some cases, there were expenditures that we had not incurred the expense yet, so it was kind of delaying the expense. It was surplus cash at the moment that would have to be, as with the land, that now we need more money to do the Penndale project.
But I just want to, again, to reiterate, we took out a bond in 92 for 25 million
Correct.
for this projected building, the second high school.
No, not at all.
Oh,
That's
okay.
not part of it at all. The board had opted to pay the expenses, starting with the land, and then following through with the architectural design of the building.
But the 92 bond was 25 million.
Correct.
And we project the high school will be somewhere around 27 million.
With the
is that what
land,
I'm-
no, with the land.
42.
It's supposed to be about 41 million.
With off-site improvements, land.
But what does this 27 million figure? It says building cost 24, on-site cost 3 million, 27 million.
That's only the actual cost of the building.
Okay.
That does not involve movable equipment.
Okay.
Purchase of land, permits, fees, off-site improvements, which we're going to be considering.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'd like to come back before Mr. White, come back now to our self-appointed historian.
What I'd like to come back to is replay the discussion that Mrs. Krieger and I had this morning, which was clearly incomplete. I'm reading from the February 17th, 1994 minute book. Motion was made by Thomas Clemens, seconded by David Whites, to approve the AIA document B-141, standard form of agreement between owner and architect, affixed hereto and made an official part of these minutes, which provides for the firm of Breslin, Ridyard, and Federo Architects to serve as architects for the new North Penn High School. This motion was carried unanimously by a polled vote. 8 votes yes, Carmen Leahy was absent. And preceding that, the document that Mr. Wood referred to was indeed circulated to all board members. The contract was attached, and I think for those that have their confidential memo notebooks, they will find February 7th, the AIA contract was distributed. Interestingly enough, it was distributed twice, as 1594 and as 1694. That's the confidential memo number on that. So it was voted upon 9-0 in January.
8-0.
It was voted upon 8-0 in February, after the contract had been circulated for review by the board.
I remember that.
I have never seen that contract. I have never seen that contract. And I will say that this states where we get a date of agreement that does officially state, for all intents and purposes, that it was agreed upon on January 20th, and a motion is coming out a month later to approve it. It is not a good practice, because you have to go by your official records, as we're going to have to rely on that.
We had official
But
approval at both meetings, but Miss Mangle requested that we take the contract back so that you folks would have an opportunity to review it. I remember that.
Came up for vote without a contract. Charles was here, and there was no contract produced.
You said you never wanted to vote on a contract again unless you saw the contract.
Right.
Unless you saw it. And that's why I did what I did on February 7th.
The record speaks that all board members did receive it.
Well-
That can be disputed, but
Well, then I guess I'd like to close my comments on this by saying that in the future, as a board member, when I call a district administrator and ask for specific documentation to justify a contract or anything else, that I would appreciate very much that I be provided that information, and that I personally don't have to go on a hunt and peck search for information that I am seeking. Thank you.
You should have seen the February agenda as well as the January agenda. That's clear now.
That's
Okay.
correct.
That's correct.
okay, we need to
Yeah,
keep
David.
moving. We have a lot of things to cover tonight. But before I turn it over to the audience of citizens, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Bose.
Hey, David.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but, okay. I stand corrected. David, it's your turn, but then I would like to turn it over to Dr. Bose to give a brief description to the audience as to where we may go in the future.
Just wanted to make a few comments, and the first of those is that a will of a majority of this board is well known, and I think we'll see the results of that in a vote very shortly. I also wanted to say that I remain in favor of a second high school, and will not argue its merits tonight, as they will probably fall on deaf ears. I am concerned that we are about to end this planning process without another plan in place. Our increased enrollment has been a concern. It is a concern, and it will continue to be a concern until a solution is found. Even if we vote tonight to expand the existing high school, it could not realistically be built or ready for occupancy before the year 2000. Being fairly confident that the board will vote to end the planning of a second high school tonight, I'd like to recommend the following. During the interview process with Dr. Bose, he was very confident at that time that he could come up with an innovative solution for us. I would therefore like to recommend that we take Dr. Bose up on his comments and recommend that he come up with a new solution as soon as he possibly can, so that we can move forward and begin to solve our enrollment problems. Those are my comments.
Thank you. All said. Very good. Dr. Bose, I'd like to put you on the spot here a little bit before we open up to the audience of citizens. We've certainly had some informal conversation as to what could transpire after tonight, and I think to head off some questions from the audience that may come up, I would ask that you would if you could just brief us on what we may expect to talk about in January that would perhaps show up on our work session in January, whether it would include bringing Mr. Breslin in, having Art involved, and getting into a discussion as to where we may go. I would just ask you for some of your thoughts at this point, again, to perhaps give the audience a feel of where we may go with this issue.
Well, it's obvious, I've been quoted accurately in the newspapers since August, and I've said from the beginning of my tenure that I thought this was a high priority for the superintendent of schools. So I do have a concept in the works that I will certainly prepare and provide the Board of Education at the January meeting, and provide the general public an opportunity to hear it and react to it. It is an alternate to a second high school. It anticipated the election outcome and what many might consider was a mandate by those who voted not to spend more money than a second, not to spend as much money as a second high school would cost as projected, and not to divide the community into two high school camps. So that concept bears a little more work, and will be prepared, as Mr. White suggested, as early as January for full public disclosure. And certainly I would prepare the board before that meeting with the usual kind of publications that prepare you for that discussion and give you some sense of what's being proposed, so that you'll be prepared to discuss it and engage the public in any comments or reactions it may have as well. And that'll be ready for the January work session.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to thank you for making good on that promise that you made back in, when did we visit him, Tom?
June.
No, it was well before August.
I forget when it was.
May?
Thank
When
you.
was it? When did we come to see you?
It'll be fine.
No,
May?
January?
February.
It was
It was
cold.
chilly.
Wait a minute, it was chilly out there.
February or
Yeah.
March.
It was-
It was
Okay.
a long time ago.
Mr. Clemens, I just have one more. There were also some other alternatives, I understand, that have been suggested over the years. What are the chances of us looking at them as well?
I think we'll certainly talk about them and bring them to the table.
Because, I
and
mean, you know,
think they
some
will
of
be-
us are
they
new
will-
board members, we've never seen them, so.
Yes, I think they would become part of the discussion in January.
Mr. Moser, you're talking about the publication that was a result of the study done by a community task force?
No, the expansion in
Second high school
Penmont.
expansion, they don't have,
Right.
even
We
the plan
don't
calls for the
have
expansion.
anything.
Mr. Wood,
As
you
new
know
board
what
member.
Mr. Mosley's talking about. We'll distribute those to you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the board before we open it up to the audience of citizens?
Tommy, I think we ought to give a few words of assurance to this community, given the concerns about how far behind we are in the schedule. And I'd just like to say that I sat through meetings listening to an advocacy of the second high school since around 1988, and there was a public forum in which a board with an overwhelming majority voted, brought forward a plan through a community forum March 10th of 1990 at the high school. Some of you may remember that. And despite the fact that there was a clear majority supporting a second high school, we managed to sit here tonight to take this vote because there was no execution of that desire to build a second high school. I don't believe that this board is of the spirit to make votes that promote a certain direction for the district and then allow it to linger for 5 to 8 years to be undone, and that when we make a decision, it will be deliberative and it will be decisive. And we will work to pull it through and to get something online to accommodate our growth at the most responsible rate of speed that we can.
Well said. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'd like to remind the audience of citizens that this is a special action meeting. So therefore, I would ask that you would adhere to the request that you only talk on the subject tonight of the second high school at this time in the meeting. Saying that, I open it up to the audience. Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Mr. Clemens. Greg Anderson, Montgomery Township. I just have a few questions, actually. First of all, has anyone calculated yet how much money we're permanently throwing away here? Not just, architects' fees, but district employees' times and so forth. How much total time and effort is being discarded with this vote?
Turn that over to Mr. Kelly, really to rehash the number that you had set forward.
I've heard a bunch tonight. I'm just wondering what is sort of considered the current final top number?
I think it would be almost impossible to figure out how much Art spent or I spent or anybody spent in time on this, Mr. Anderson. We can give you the actual dollar figure, but not the hidden cost or.
But on a cash basis, it's somewhere between $500,000 and $600,000 right now?
That's correct, $562,000.
Okay. I'm a little concerned about this topic of the signature by a non-president. Is there a board policy on actions of a certain matter requiring a president signature as compared to the secretary's signature? I recall when I spoke with Mr. Kelly about some of the bond issues, one of the concerns about an issue that had some problems was that the board was never formally notified. It was just sort of indirectly conveyed through the board secretary rather than made fully available to the board. I just wondered if there's a policy on that.
I'm not aware of it.
So the secretary is allowed to sign any document on behalf of the whole board, even though the secretary is not a voting member of this board?
But I'll ask
Just
Ken to check with our solicitor on that and to
Okay.
get back to you on that, Mr. Anderson.
Okay. If the vote is taken tonight, what will be the status? Oops, sorry. If a vote is taken tonight, what will be the status of the land that the district currently owns, and when will that matter be discussed?
I would say that'll be part of the discussion in the January meeting.
Okay, but there's no immediate action intended?
No immediate action that I know of, or is there any other board member aware of anything?
Only to remind you that I have requested that we consider appraisals both of that property as well as the Plain Site Holdings. So before we would take any action, Greg, I believe we would have to thoroughly evaluate the current market value, the potential market value, and make some, and do weigh the positives and negatives of whether we hold that land or sell.
The reason I ask is I've been studying that, and I've come to the conclusion that to finance that as open space would cost the district less than to allow it to be developed and incur the cost of the children that land would then support. And I'd like to show that to the board, because I think other school districts have been, certainly Central Bucks has been doing the same thing, actually buying up open space or using grants, because it ends up being less costly than incurring the educational costs of the children that would otherwise be housed on that land once it is developed. Lastly, I'm a little concerned. I'm wondering about the reason for doing this as a special action and what precedent it sets. Why can't this wait until next Thursday? Why is this only coming before the community now and being immediately voted on before it can be more fully publicized?
That was a discussion that I had with Dr. Bose along with Mr. Mengel. Just basically taking the pulse of the community. I felt it was my prerogative to work with the superintendent on it, to go ahead and put it on a special action. Mr. Wood had been talking to me many times about what are we going to do as far as Mr. Breslin, and I felt that the community wanted an answer as soon as possible as which way this board would be going.
Okay, thank you very much.
Also to hold the cost, right?
Okay, other questions? Okay, Mr. Taylor.
I'm Bill Taylor from Lansdale. I'd like to ask what actually is being gained by this action, and what actually is being risked by not taking this action in terms of money. Just why?
Incurring more costs.
Do you gain anything by making this action? Don't you have exactly the same thing if you just don't approve the next architect's behavior? What difference is there?
Tommy.
I can't answer that.
And one other thing, unless I'm very much mistaken, we're all minorities. The overwhelming vote of the community was that there was nothing of personality or project or principle on the ballot to convince the people, the majority of our community, to vote this time. Let's not talk about the sense of the community. We don't have it. The community stays out.
Well, sir, I think you'll find out tonight later that it's the majority opinion of this board to move forward in this manner. Any other questions, ma'am?
That wasn't my question.
Oh, that's your answer.
Since I tend to be Juanita Shermer from Hatfield Township, to follow the rules, since I tend to be a person who likes everyone, close your ears, and those whose foot fits the shoe, take it as a criticism. It's not my job, man. Credit Eddie Prince from Chico and the Man. I think it's shocking, although I shouldn't be surprised, as to the incompetence of the previous board. The thousands of dollars that have been thrown away. People signing documents who have no right to sign a document. I think you better check before you pay the bill. Donna, Vicki, Terry, if you're listening, you've been vindicated. With all due respect, Tom, yes, we do have to go on and try and get over our personal things. But considering the losses that we face of the thousands of dollars, and I hope we are not forced into a new school, it's like telling a woman or anyone who's been raped, forget about it and let the perpetrator go. Mr. Potash, I think, is the one who deserves the prime responsibility for this confusion and this mess. What do we pay a solicitor for? For the percentages he makes in the bond funds? I think the community should know. This is one of the reasons Mr. Robinson has filed suit on behalf of the citizens to find out. This is probably what prompted all this to be uncovered, although I do not label anyone here in particular as being deceptive. I'm horrified. I'm angered. Mr. Potash, I think someone should look into you. Don't pay the bill. And I'll say Mr. White's being on the board, he deserves a little bearing too because of being with the past majority who persecuted those who tried to bring to the public exactly what had been going on behind closed doors. And how many times things were asked for that they never got. Thank you. Citizens be involved, not personal hatred, but upon deceit.
Thank you. Ma'am?
I think that she'd be like if she didn't like everybody.
I'm Judith Thomas from Hatfield Township. I wasn't planning on speaking tonight, but I have a question and I have a request. I think we have been here for about an hour now, and we have been talking about what the past board has done. We have a new board majority now. As many people said, the people have spoken. The majority of the people voted for the current majority of the board members. They have the power. They are at the reign. I don't see how it benefits any of us to go on and fight ghosts. This board has the chance to lead. This board has the chance to show us what it can do. And we are very anxious and confident that a lot of positive things will come out. But I think in order to do that, we have to stop somewhere. It doesn't...
Ma'am, could you direct your comments to what is on the agenda tonight, the second high school issue?
Yes, I'm directing my comments there, that I think obviously this board has the power to stop the second high school because the majority of the people on this board, this is what they want. Why don't we just go ahead and do it? Why are we stirring up trouble? That's what I don't understand. And I would like to have positive meetings. I want to see, and going back to the second high school, I echo the sentiment of those people who are concerned that we don't have another plan yet. So that's my question, that why don't we talk about that? What we are going to do, not what wasn't done or how it is
I
done.
believe that's what we will do in January, when Dr. Bose brings forth a plan that we can work on.
But I would like to see positive sentiment going forward, not going backward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sir in the back?
My name is Phil Segrist. I'm a resident in Upper Gwynedd. I would like to address the board and make a few suggestions. Ladies and gentlemen, the second high school has been a very controversial issue, and we have to look at that in light of the affordability and the requirements of the student bodies in the school district. I would remind you that we are $71 million in debt. I would remind you all that we have a $110 million a year operating budget. So we're talking about big money that the community suspects has not been spent wisely in the past several years. I would like to suggest that to the minority members of the board, Mr. Allen, and your partner over here, Mr. Weitz, that please get with the program. The people in this community have spoken. They have told you they want good education, but they also want fiscal responsibility. I think we ought to take the board to a higher plane and address the seriousness of our problem, the cost of the delays, the suspicion of the community that we don't know whether we need a new high school or in addition to a new high school or whatever combination. We don't trust the numbers. So the first thing I think you can do for us is get a good baseline to work from. And then, Dr. Bose, we're glad you're here. We want you to look at those numbers, and we want you to make some suggestions so that we can review them and get on with the program. We don't need a lot of parochial bickering. We don't need a lot of positioning. What we need is a lot of action. So please elevate it to a higher plane and give this community the service that we're entitled to and that we also elected a new board to do. Thank you.
Sir,
That's all right. It doesn't matter. I just want to say a couple things very quickly. Number one, in the many years that we have discussed a second high school, there have been no improprieties. There have been no illegalities. Mr. Weir was certainly in line with his responsibilities as the board secretary to sign a contract. Mr. Potash has always acted in the best interest of this district when it comes to contracts. We are talking about majorities and politics. The previous boards have used those majorities to move a project that they felt was in the best interest of this community forward. There is a new majority on this board. It will be their prerogative to move the project forward as they see fit. There have been no improprieties. This has been reasonable. It has been upfront. It has been done in accordance with every law of the state of Pennsylvania. And I, for one, am tired of hearing about waste. This has been a majority board vote all along, and that's how things work in this government.
Hi, my name is Marla Darcy. I live at Eagle Lane in Upper Gwynedd. And I just wanted to really echo the two previous citizens who basically said about moving ahead and doing what's best for the district. And I just have some real concerns. I don't know personally where I stand on a second high school, but I know that about 12 years ago we lived in Turnersville, New Jersey, at which point the citizens there were very much against building a second high school. And what wound up happening was all the kids were on split session, and it went on for many, many years, and the school system kind of went downhill, and the area became less desirable as a result. And so having lived through that, experience, I do have some concerns. But I don't understand why tonight there has to be this to cease and desist. Why can't, if you're discussing a new option in January, which nobody knows as citizens what it is yet, why throw out this old option? In other words, why not look at all the options, including building a second high school, since you don't know what the plan in January is going to be? Am I making myself clear?
I'll give it a try, and Mr. Taylor, in all fairness to you, I cut you off rather quickly, and I'll do the best, and I'd ask that Art would perhaps help me out on this, but basically, I believe Mr. Breslin was asking for direction from this board. Should he keep the dollars ticking on working on this project, or should he stop? And this is the first board meeting of the new board, and therefore I feel it is appropriate that we take the vote tonight. That's why it's on the agenda. So at least Mr. Breslin knows that he should stop at this point and not keep the meter ticking.
Okay, so if the money expenditure is stopped, then does that mean, though, are we really getting the message that you, as a board, you will absolutely not take into consideration a second high school? In other words, once all the plans are in and you weigh all the different options, does that mean, is this motion tonight, does it just mean that you're going to stop spending money, or does it mean that as of this moment when you vote on this, that the second high school will be permanently out the window and that you won't even consider it? Because I really have concerns. I agree with Mr. Segrist that we haven't seen the real figures yet and been convinced either way. There's been a lot of politics on both sides, but I feel like it really deserves, it's such an important issue that it deserves to have a lot more investigation into it.
I can't speak for the whole board, but I'll speak for this board member. As far as I'm concerned, when I vote tonight, the second high school, we will not proceed. We will not keep evaluating that direction. It's this board's member opinion that we need to go another direction. That as far as the second high school, it's a dead issue.
Okay, then let me ask the question. When Dr. Bose presents his proposal or plan in January, if that plan doesn't meet up to a majority vote or whatever, or let's say hypothetically that the second high school begins to look like a more viable option, it will be dead? I don't understand this.
Madam, it is the intent of the motion that I made tonight that the second high school as an option is dead. That is the understanding I have, not only for myself in the 4 years that I served here. I feel it was a dictate from the community. I felt encouraged all along by the community to do just that. I believe I ran with 4 people in the primary and in the general election that pledged to some extent that they too felt that the second high school was a dead issue and would not support it in any way, shape, or form come election should that happen. So my motion tonight is not only to cease and desist on any planning activities, any further spending with the Breslin firm, but also to kill that project.
Well, I can certainly, as a citizen, see ceasing and desisting on spending future money, but it seems to me closed-minded and narrow-minded not to explore all options. We're talking about the welfare of our children, and I don't know if you quite have the pulse on the public that you think you do. Thank you very much.
Tommy?
I'll give Vicki a chance. Go ahead.
Okay. Officially, I think, so that there's no confusion, the motion itself is simply a cease and desist, and just as we're here tonight to undo a vote of a previous board, until ground is broken on an option, if 5 board members were to change their mind and do a complete turnaround, they could certainly bring forward a vote and resurrect the second high school. So the motion technically is one way. I think the other is board attitudes and feelings. And I don't believe anyone up here has to apologize or be considered narrow-minded for not giving further consideration to a second high school and being of the attitude that it's time to look at alternatives. Because after all, as I've said before, we've had 8 years. And if we have not embraced a second high school after 8 years of public dialogue, I don't believe it's going to happen anytime in the near future. So it's best that we move forward with alternatives that can perhaps generate public consensus and support. Because if this community in the last election didn't support a second high school now, they would support it even less once construction and the bills rolled in. So it was wise, I believe, to follow this path.
Okay, thanks, Vicki. Sir in the back, Mr. Robinson.
Gary Robinson, Hatfield Township. I'd like to respond to the last speaker and the present question or comment. As I understand or see the situation, stopping any work by the architect on the present project doesn't close the door to a potential second high school for the district. But I think it is a wise decision in relation to the specific property of the whole tract. Since the school district is 42 square miles, if you looked at this paper as a representation, the whole tract sits in the very corner on the border. Clearly, in any prudent person's decision or group of persons, how can you justify sticking a high school in the very corner of the district? I think it was a $6 million buy of a $1 million property. The whole deal, and at this point I want to turn to Mr. Weiss's comments, does indicate improprieties in the past in this district. And I think how this meeting started off earlier with questions over contracts, the board rubber stamping what advisors, legal, financial, and otherwise, did. This board is showing what needs to be done in this community for good education. A board that looks at contracts, agreements, and reviews situations in total, and the board makes the decisions instead of hired underlings. And I'll finish off my comments with, in relation to the petition that Mr. DeFelice and myself filed, it was a petition merely asking for the court to direct the school district and officials to open public records to the public. Mr. Clemens.
Sir, and keep your comments to the second high school, sir.
Okay. Dealing with the second high school then, and it involves this petition. It states in the petition that you ask that this petition be dismissed on the basis that it falls outside applicable statute of limitations period and because it is barred by the doctrine of laches. My question, Mr. Clemens, is since when is there a statute of limitations on access to public records? That's what's behind the present problem. Are public records going to be open to the public, or is as this position of at least the solicitor of the board that the public record be closed? What's your answer?
Sir, that's really not a question towards the second high school, but I'll answer it that our solicitor advises us that we are providing information that is needed for you. And
well, that's not true.
I'll leave it at that, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Clemens, I must comment once again that the word improprieties indicates that there is something that is illegal going on here. There is nothing illegal going on here. Mr. Robinson, you may accuse former boards of bad judgment, but improprieties is something that I am awfully tired of you bringing up. There's nothing been proven through independent auditors and other investigations. Bad judgments, perhaps changes in policies, but improprieties have not been proven in any way.
I forget who was first. I think it was Karen Clark. Mrs. Clark.
Karen Clark, Montgomery Township. I need to agree with Mrs. Sheriff. For the last 8 years, there's no question that the option of a second high school has been looked at and excoriated, and we know everything that there could possibly be known about a second high school. And while we were doing that, all those other options were ignored. In order to move on to what those other options were, I think we have to stop talking about a second high school. If it turns out that all those other options that people had are worse than a second high school, we've already paid for the plans. The land is there. But in order to get on to what those other options will be, because these people are sitting here because 10,500 people, or something like that, voted to stop a second high school. They let us know loud and clear that if they were sitting here, that's how they would vote. And I expect them to do that tonight.
Good evening. I'm Chuck Hammond from Montgomery Township. David White, yes, he is correct. He did have a 5-vote majority before, and what that previous board did in their judgment was correct. The contracts that were signed for whatever expenditures were spent have been spent. I think, again, we're spending an awful lot of time tonight bickering amongst ourselves and, again, coming up with issues to divide this community. We can't do that, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to turn into boys and girls again as we did during the summer. It's time, I think, we voted for 5 people. This community spunk out, I think, rather clearly for 5 candidates back in March that said they were not in favor of the second high school. These same 5 people were elected this fall in the general election. There are 2 other people on the board said they were also against this school. Best I can see tonight, it's going to be a 7-2 vote. I think this issue is over with. Let's move on. Let's Dr. Bose do his deal, and let's find out what the other alternatives he has for us, because I, for one, have confidence in what he can do. I'm also a product of a high school of 6,000 students in it, and we all graduated fine, and believe it or not, we didn't kill each other in the hallway. We ate lunch in the school, and we did great. So let's move on, ladies and gentlemen, now.
Okay, any other comments or questions from the audience? In the back, ma'am?
I'm Eileen Crawford from Upper Gwynedd. I actually just have a request of Dr. Bose, and this does relate to the second high school, or the demise of the second high school. It's clear that the decision tonight to cease work on the second high school is being made solely on the basis of the perceived inequity between the cost of a second high school and any other alternative, even though we have no idea what the other alternative will be or how much that would cost. I personally find that intriguing, but nevertheless, obviously it's being done on the basis of dollars. I have heard no one stand up here and tell you that they want you to stop the second high school because they believe it's an educationally bad idea. So what I'm asking Dr. Bose to do is that when he brings forward his suggestion in January, and I, for one, am very interested in what that is and will come at it with as open a mind as possible. As disappointed as I am personally, I want to see us have a positive solution for our community. But I'm concerned with the educational value of these options. And again, as has been the past with this board for at least the last 2 years, the educational value of options seems to take a back seat to the complaints of the constituency about how their money has been managed. And while that is critically important, and I do understand it, we cannot forget, and I hope that the 7 of you who make up a very strong majority can somehow remember when you cast your votes and when you analyze options, what the educational ramifications will be. Specifically, I would like to ask Dr. Bose, when he makes his presentation in January, to talk to those of us who are parents concerned about our children's future, what those options will mean regarding, for example, the types or numbers of different types of courses. In other words, if we have a tight building situation, do we have to pare down to just core courses? Will we be getting rid of some of our AP selections or other things? I realize these are preliminary thoughts, but these are thoughts that, quite honestly, could come down the road later because suddenly there won't be enough room for the variety of courses that we offer now. I'd like to know what's going to happen to class sizes, depending on the facilities that we're looking at. I would like to know whether team teaching is a possibility, or what kind of teaching or curriculum situations will be used to minimize the overcrowding that we may or may not be facing. And I would like to know how, since we will have perhaps only one high school, how extracurricular activities will be provided for our children so that more than 1 or 5%, more than the cream of the crop, has an opportunity to participate and be able to put that on their college applications. So I'm concerned about those issues, and I would hope that you would include those when you're making your presentation. I think they deserve equal weight to the financial concerns.
Thank you.
Charles Bailey, Upper Gwynedd Township. I'd like to address the point about the quality of education. I was here when we decided to build the existing high school, And at that time, it was decided that a large high school was better because you had a larger pool of students to draw from, and because you had a larger pool of students, you could offer more diverse course alternatives for people. To me, going to 2 high schools is moving to small high schools where you'll have less diversity, less educational opportunity, and probably less educational results. But that argument has been advanced before. I'm not originating.
Okay, Mr. Stewart?
Mary Ann Stewart, Upper Gwinnett Township. Again, as I've said at this podium, I was a member of the year-long High School Options Task Force. 18 of us addressed many of these issues that the last 2 speakers have asked that, again, they be addressed. And after almost a year of study, we came up with the second high school. Why this board, Mrs. Shearer, dragged their feet on it, of which you have been a part of it, is, I don't understand either, the past boards. It is a real question. And why this present board now will choose to be more expedient in the process, and it's becoming more imperative that this board become expedient in that process of making a decision. Why for 4 years since I have been involved in this, 8 years that you say you have been involved in this has dragged on, I don't know. But, I mean, we do need an answer, and we do need it now. But it just sits me, it just baffles me as I sit here that questions are brought up that are in a blue book of almost over 1,000 pages, that so many of these issues have been discussed. And everyone is sitting here like, please answer these questions. And they have been addressed.
First timers. Any other questions or comments before we come around for round 2? I'd ask that you would make it short, ma'am. Okay.
Anita Shermer, Hatfield Township. I see Mr. White's pondering within himself. In deep thought. I'm not accusing anyone of committing any crime, so let it. What I was talking about was exactly about the contract, and it is about the school, the new school. The contract and things like that. We need reassurance from the community. The community needs reassurance from the board that it will not just go, oh, well, that's all that money lost, and not seek a way to not have to pay any more than is necessary. So I hope this board, and I'm confident that they will be more prudent, and I thank Charisse for uncovering this contract that nobody saw. Thank you.
Well, I need to correct you, ma'am, on that. It's my belief, now other board members can beg to differ, but it's my belief that that contract was distributed to board members. I'd like to clarify that, okay?
Well, if you're confused, you can see how we are. So thank you. Please go on, and please don't pay anything more than you have to.
Tom, I'd like to say something.
Okay, let's. Seeing no more hands, I'm going to conclude this session of the audience of citizens. I'm going to turn it back over to the board for one more round before we call for the question.
I just have one statement. It was mentioned by one of the individuals in the audience of citizens that why are we making a move on this tonight? I think it states in the contract that we have a period of time that we have to notify these people. So we don't have all day to make a vote on this. We're bound by the contract. We have to notify them in writing in a certain number of days.
Any other questions, comments? I'd ask you keep them brief. It's going to be a long night.
I will be brief, Mr. Chairman. Sitting here listening to everybody's comments tonight, I can't let this evening go by without stating emphatically that yes, this community did turn out in mass number and chose to vote for 5 board members who they felt best represented their feelings, not only on the second high school, but a myriad of issues which we debated. It disturbs me tonight that we once again have individuals coming forward talking about a new majority and 7-2 votes, giving the impression that there is a divide. I, for one, believe that there are 9 individual board members sitting up here. I can honestly say that I probably, on many occasions, will have to agree to disagree on votes that come up in the future. And I would hope that each board member sitting up here would look at their individual conscience before casting any vote. And it disturbs me that there is a consensus in this room from the audience that is giving a public perception that the 5 new board members are predestined to vote in a 7-2 majority. And I would also like to make available to Mr. Allen and Mr. Whites that I have as much respect for your individual opinions and your individual votes, however you may choose to cast them, and I would hope that you would have the same respect for mine. I encourage any member of this community, if you have a question, if you have concerns, that you not only call the individuals that you may have voted for, but that you use your right to call those that you did not, and make your opinions known to us individually. I think in order to take this board, this district, to a higher plane, that we have to stop talking about majorities. We are individual board members that make up the North Penn School District Executive Board. And I could not go on without saying that tonight, because it is one of the things that has distressed me greatly. And I also want the administrators to also keep that in mind, and Mr. Bose. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments over here?
Dr. Bose.
Okay, questions or comments over here?
Only comment that when I cast my vote tonight, it is definitely keeping the future academics of the school district in mind. I can understand some of the frustration, particularly of those who served on the task force. However, I would say that that task force recommendation was for a 9 through 12, 2,000 student school. And so you were talking about equal enrollments in 2 locations. And while that was a very expensive proposal, perhaps it brought a higher balance than what was most recently under discussion, which happens to be version 4 or 5 of a second high school. When the plans were brought forward from the architect that January and he showed the plans, my basic question was, where is the education plan that justifies the design along with the functional capacity assigned to the building? And I was told there was none. Without an education plan, you would have had a building that was driving the curriculum rather than curriculum driving the design of the building. As we sat here and we were contemplating the issues, the costs, the expenses, I had in mind the restraints, the effects that dwindling tax dollars, less available tax dollars would have on our curriculum offerings. But I also wondered, how can you possibly function with a school building that has 2,200 students, 2,400 students, and provide the exact same level of curriculum as one with 1,200 students? In that case, since you have to maintain equal education within the same district, the 1,200 student school building would be driving the curriculum of a much larger population that could uphold even greater diversity in the curriculum, as it would with its extracurricular programs. I asked the question of Dr. Persing, how do you possibly expect to maintain the comprehensive and far-reaching program of studies that we now carry with 2,400 students once this population is divided up between the 2 buildings? He said, you won't. It won't happen. I said, there are members of this community have been led to believe that it will happen. He left. He couldn't believe that that could possibly be in anyone's mind because it's impractical and essentially totally unfeasible. I said, well, this hasn't been brought forward to the community. Anyone who thinks that this is just about financial expense is greatly mistaken. The second high school had an academic expense to it also, as in you will find in comparing our district to to much smaller districts, Dr. Vaughn has brought many, many programs online simply because there was a student body to sustain it. Many of your AP courses now exist with 8. When it came down to dividing that population up, and we had 3 at one location and perhaps 5 at another, we would be faced with the questions of whether we duplicate or delete. And I believe deletions would become much more common as those expenses rolled in. So I take this vote with a clear conscience as not just a taxpayer of this community, but someone who has 2 children, both of whom will hit the high school level and be graduating at the year 2000 and the year 2004, right in the midst of our highest population crunch. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? All right, before I
Call for the question.
call for the, well, I wanted to just make one comment.
President's right, Tommy.
See, I just wanted to say that I have 4 kids that are going to be going through crunch time. And I want to assure the community that I'm not just voting my pocketbook. I'm voting for what I think's right, not only educationally, but also for an all-around, what's the best education for my children and other children in the surrounding community. So I just want the community to know that. I don't have anything else to say. I'm ready to vote.
Okay. Call for the question.
All right, there's a motion to consider ordering the cease and desist of all planning. I'm sorry, there's a motion ordering, drop the word consider, ordering the cease and desist of all planning activities regarding the construction of a second high school. Is that correct motion?
That's correct.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Ayes have it. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, hold on. No, Bill, I said earlier that I was going to move that into the works. Motion made by Mrs. Scher, second by Ms. Mengel. All those in favor say, any questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay. Our special action meeting is adjourned, and now we will move into our board committee meetings. And the first item on that agenda will be the finance audit report. So I will turn that over to Mr. Kelly, and I also believe Mr. Furman is here.
Yes. I'd like to introduce to the board Mr. Ed Furman, a partner with the firm of Maley, Falconero and Company. Ed is the partner in charge of our audit, and he will do the presentation of the document that you received.
We're going to take a 3-minute break. I have the timer right here. 3 minutes.
They've been here, so I
Okay.
thought they were distributed. They're on my table.
Okay, that's all. I just wondered if perhaps you had them in your briefcase or something to hand out. It would make it easier.
Can we start off this one? Do we get them?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
We can start on the
What
audit
we should do.
report, sure.
Okay.
You want to flip to page 6, that's our audit report on the general purpose financial statements.
You might be working on something.
Similar to prior years, it's an unqualified opinion except for how the school district reports their fixed assets. The fixed assets are reported at replacement value, which is not in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, which would have fixed assets reported at historical cost. This policy is a typical practice of school districts in Pennsylvania, so it's not an unusual qualification. That's the same wording that you've had in prior years. We do get into the spreadsheet starting there. I don't know if you want to wait until the financials come or not.
The reason for Freddie is followed, but you can continue, I guess. If everyone's okay, if they end up with fiscal review.
Anybody have any problems with what we have so far?
Let's keep it rolling.
All right. On page 7 starts the balance sheet of all the funds and the other account groups for the district. Just pointing out some of the highlights and the key financial changes from the prior year. The investments, and I'll work off the total columns, which is the second page of that, just as a general reference. The total investments for the district dropped about $30 million from the prior year. The majority of that represented the payback of the Emmaus loan with the interest. The remainder of that came out of the bond fund for other capital projects. So that's the major change on the asset side. Taxes receivable dropped slightly. It was 2.6 million last year, it's down to about 2.3 million. That just reflects that some of the delinquent taxes are now coming in. So that level is dropping slightly from the prior year.
Ed, if I could just interject one thing. With the taxes receivable coming down, in order for many of these properties to get their assessments lowered, they had to pay their back taxes. So that's one reason we had an excess in delinquencies that were cleared up.
It's interesting.
The amount to be provided for long-term debt dropped about $28 million. Again, that reflects the payback of the Emmaus one-year note and also just 1 year of amortization. And you'll see that back in the footnotes where it shows the different year's notes and the principal paybacks for the year. The fixed asset group went up about $8 million, again, from finishing the fiscal 94 projects and also the other capital projects that were done during the current fiscal year. Down in the liability section, accrued salaries and benefits represents the teachers who elect to be paid over a 12-month period. So that liability is recorded at the end of June and paid throughout the summer. And that's up about $400,000 from the prior year. The other major changes, as Dennis said, the taxes held in escrow went down. There were some large settlements there. The deferred revenue represents delinquent taxes that, if they're not collected in a 60-day window after June 30th, they're deferred and they'll be recorded as revenue in the year that they actually come in. So you have about $2 million of delinquent taxes at the end of last June. Again, the other major liability is in the long-term debt group. That was about $99 million last year with the Emmaus loan, and that's down to $71 million this year. And that brings you down to fund equity. General fund, the total fund balance is about $6.3 million at the end of June 95. 4.1 of that has been reserved for the teacher contract settlement. That's a retroactive piece of the contract that was paid in the current fiscal year 96, and also budgeted in the current year 96. I think it's important that fund balance be reserved and not shown as just a general unreserved fund balance going into the next year. It brings your unreserved fund balance down to about $2.2 million. And that's about 2.4% of general fund revenues. And a rule of thumb for a lot of school districts is anywhere from 3 to 5% of general fund revenue is a target for the unreserved fund balance. So you're at 2.4 at the end of June 1995.
2.4% or?
2.4% of the general fund revenues represents the unreserved fund balance, or undesignated fund balance.
And that's on the low side?
On the low side, yes.
About 50% of what you would hope to have in your fund balance?
A lot of the school districts would do target 5%. And some go down as low as 3%.
I think what that explanation on the $4 million, Dennis was going to also clarify that is the first 2 years of the teacher's contract as far as the increases of retroactivity.
The
right.
2 fiscal years prior.
93, 94.
92, 93, and 93, 94.
Should be 90.
94,
I'm sorry,
93, 94, 94, 95. And
that expenditure was paid and budgeted in fiscal 96.
right. Well, we've had some questions as to what the amount of that is, would be. And so now it's being reported as a part of the audit that is, and that it wasn't, whether you say it was budgeted, it was money that came out of the budget because of the fund balance that was there. And you applied it within that fiscal year while it was paid out subsequent.
Well, as reserving the fund balance is being needed for the next fiscal year, starting next fiscal year.
Now, when we budgeted 6.5 million, or 6.8 million is what we carried over as a beginning balance on our records because of the closeout that occurs. Actually, the budget was approved the same night as the contract, so of course Dennis didn't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, that's an estimate.
In developing that.
The audit's
You have 6.3, so that fund balance also, not only is it down to 2.2, But there was
It's less
also a
than what-
$500,000 difference between what we intended to carry over and what actually came through. Is that correct?
If I can piggyback on that question, or maybe ask it a different way that I understand it. When we had the balance carry forward to this year of 6.2?
6.3.
In our budget.
Yes.
We had that, we now have an item on our, one of our liabilities is the $4+ million for the retroactivity of the contract. Did that 6.2, as we saw it, include that $4 million?
4.1 of it, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Probably one of the other key pieces that I wanted to point out on the balance sheet is in the capital project fund. At the end of June '95, it's showing about $12.4 million of investments. And as we see when we get into the footnotes later on, you had committed contracts at the end of June for over $14 million, which was one of the discussion points we had last week. So as of June, you had more contracts let than the capital projects fund had available to fund those. Page 8 is a summary of the revenue and expenditures. Again, comparing this year with the prior fiscal year. And all these items you'll see in more detail later on. We have a supplemental information which breaks a lot of these numbers down further. But the local sources, which are primarily real estate taxes, are up about $7 million. The state appropriations and other state subsidies are down almost $900,000. Down on the expenditure side, the instruction expenditures are up a couple $100,000. The support services are up about $1.2 million. And the debt service, again, looks high in the capital projects. That $25.6 million represents the Emmaus loan payback plus the interest on that loan. Page 9 is another summary of the revenue and expenditures. It's just comparing the prior page actual numbers with the amended budget numbers. Page 10, we show the food service as what's called an enterprise fund. Again, the goal there is that the sales for the food are to cover the expenditures. That's why it's shown as an enterprise fund, and that's typical presentation for a school district. Total operating revenues is comparable to the prior year, about $2.3 million in the last fiscal year. The food costs were up slightly, so the gross profit this year was $903,000. It was about $940,000 last year. The other operating expenses were pretty comparable to the prior year. The state and federal subsidies were up about $100,000, and it worked its way down to a net income from the food service of about almost $35,000.
Mr. Furman, excuse me.
Yes.
You're showing a deficit of $72,507 ending inventory. What does that represent, please?
That's the food inventory that was on hand at the end of June '95.
So we show that as a loss?
No, that's your workup of the cost of sales. You start with the beginning inventory at the prior year, and that goes into food costs.
Right.
Then you have your purchases through the year, and then you subtract that your ending food inventory, and that represents the cost of the food for the year.
Okay, you're just, okay. Instead of putting a minus sign there, you just bracketed it.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's not a loss per se, it's just...
Okay, my counting background is your bracket something, that's a lot. Okay. Yeah, right.
Yes.
Mr. Furman, gross profit on food services, I know I had this discussion with Bill before he left. I'm assuming $903,000 was carried over into this upcoming year, this year that we're in now. Generally, in other school districts that you cover, is that high carryover balance?
Well, the carryover balance is really the net income at the bottom, which is after the other operating expenses too. The gross profit is just from the food component piece of that, and then you've got the payroll and the other operations of that department, and that works its way down to net income of about $34,000 at the bottom, and that's the number that's added to the the prior year retained earnings number.
Okay, since you had done the audit in the year prior to this one, did you notice an increase in the other than payroll and the other and benefits? And did you notice a larger portion
No,
of
the
expenditures
total
being taken in this year as were recommended? I
Nothing
think, in
major.
the audit?
Last year, the operating expenses totaled about $1.45 million. So they were up slightly in total. And each of the categories had small increases.
Okay, I believe I recall a conversation during that budget year, one audit back, that there was a desire that more expense be taken in the area of food service, and that more monies be taken to cover more of their expenses than out of general.
There's an allocation of costs to try to match up all the costs of that department.
Right. Thank you.
While we're on that page, I would like to point out, with all the discussion going on in Washington about reforming the National School Lunch Program, I'd just like the board to look at where the actual loss from operations shows $621,000. Mr. Mosley, that is an actual loss there. The only thing that helps us out, if you look further down, is the non-operating revenues, such as the federal subsidies and the state subsidies, the $552,000 and $87,000. I just want the board to be aware that if they do reform that and go with block grants, that could have a dramatic impact on the profitability of a food service program in a district such as North Penn, that is considered a wealthy district in relation to many of the others in the area.
Right.
Dennis, what is the action proposed to take place on those subsidies?
On the subsidy, there's talk in Washington about going with block grants, which would be given to this, instead of giving to the individual districts, they'd go directly to the state, and then the state would allocate them as they, according to a plan that they develop, rather than based on the formula, which now helps each individual district as they file their reports.
Before the end of this school year, approximately, do you think that might take place?
It could happen late this year or early the beginning of next year.
There's no talk of retroactivity on that, though, is there, Denny?
No, sir, there's not.
On page 11 is the cash flow, again, just for the enterprise fund only. And again, that's a required statement of the financial statements. All that does is take the loss from operations of the prior page and works its way down to the net change in cash for that fund for the year. So you see different increases and decreases in receivables and payables and the receipt of the federal state subsidies. The biggest reason for the decrease in cash, you can see, is an increase in receivables. That's just the timing of receiving the federal and state money, which did come in after June 30, 95. The footnotes start on page 12. First, really about 5 pages, just describe the different accounting policies that are used, the different funds and fund types, and that's just general background information that's been consistent with the prior year financial statements. The numbers in the actual financials start on page 17. Note B is a reconciliation of the real estate taxes.
Let's direct that to Dennis to see where we can go with this.
What we did was just, I didn't know Mr. Frum was going to do anything but with the financials. I was directed that we weren't going to give the entire document to the public. While it would be available for their perusal at any time, that we were just giving the full document to the board.
This is descriptives of the authorities such as the North Penn School District.
Right. What the other information given to
And
the public?
governmental fund types explaining what an enterprise fund is for the cafeteria and food service.
Right.
Yeah, the first 5 pages are consistent
They're
with
kind
prior
of
years.
descriptive, they're not.
They're standard footnotes, yes.
I can direct that Mr. Keller to make copies available to you after the meeting or at his earliest convenience.
Again, on page 17 is a reconciliation for the real estate taxes, starting at the initial assessed value, working its way down to the different discounts and penalties, the net taxes collected for the current fiscal year. On page 18 and 19 is a summary of the cash and investments of the district. And the key piece of information there is what category that they're placed under. And you can see from the detail that they're either invested in federal treasuries or pooled groups that invest in federal securities, or if they're in a checking or savings account, the banks have pledged federal securities for any amount that go over $100,000. And that's a typical practice for a municipality. Page 20 is a summary of the various receivables by fund. Again, you see the real estate tax breakdown is your largest piece. The intergovernmental receivable deals with the federal and state subsidies. Again, most of that has come in since June 95. Page 21 is a summary of the fixed asset activity for the year. The changes in the long-term debt group start on page 22.
This is what the public has, the pages starting here with the debt.
You see the largest change there is the maturity of the Emmaus loan, or the payback of the $25 million there. The other debt that matured was just a normal 1-year amortization of the loan, the principal and interest. And then we summarize the different obligations and the different repayment terms over the next couple pages of that.
Page 23 then is our total outstanding debt, 71 million?
71 million, yes.
That's our total outstanding bond debt.
Outstanding bonds, the interest.
Bond debt.
The interest, Mr. Mosey, if you look at the...
Total principal and interest is the 107 million.
Right, at the top of page 24, if you go turn. Right. At the very top of that page where it says the annual requirements to amortize all debts, including interest payments of $107 million. That's our total debt, including debt service.
Thank you.
Page 25 is a footnote describing the state pension plan that the district participates in, and just some general information on that plan. Yes?
I think that page 24, my copy, I don't have page 20, I don't have a page number on the bottom. But where you gave the amortized debt, I had a question, because I saw where you deducted the $25 million from the Emmaus on the principal.
Yes.
And yet I was wondering why it's stating $139.6 million, which means our amortized debt is still elevated beyond.
That was on the draft, and the revised one had it at $107 million.
Oh, okay, it has gone down.
Yeah, that was a carryover.
I was like, excuse me, our principal's dropped, but our amortized fees
No, the 130
from the copy you gave me, and as I was
$139
reading
million
it.
had the amount from the prior year that we just, getting the draft out quick, that didn't get updated.
Oh, okay.
So the bound version, which is at the top of
Okay.
the page, has that
See,
107.
I was awake as I read this. I'm like, oh, that's nice, the principal went down, but with interest it's going up, so I was, okay. Thank you. We can tear this one up.
Page 26 is the last page of the footnotes. Again, there's a commitment and contingency footnote which comments on the number of tax assessment appeals that are going on with the district, and also the fact that there's $14 million of construction commitments as of the end of June 95. And then there's the subsequent event footnote at the bottom, which deals with the teacher settlement.
So as far as assessment appeals, note K, that's all the information we have on any assessment appeals.
Now, you'll have, the legal files are voluminous by property, by status.
All right, Mr. Clements, I asked I'm not sure whether it's been given to you yet. I asked Mr. Potash to please get together all the outstanding legal claims that they were involved in. There's 29 current assessment appeals and 3 or 4 other kind of litigations that are out there. Okay. But he's provided that to us. I don't think it just came in. I don't think we've had a chance to get that to you.
Okay.
Dennis, how many are with the court are yet to go before the board? I mean, you're saying there are an appeal, which means then the assessment board has made judgment, and then there are an appeal process. How about those that have filed but not yet come forward at all? Do we know?
They have up through the end of December really to file, so there's probably an unknown amount out there at the moment.
Mr. Potash, give you any idea when he might have those figures?
No.
Probably wouldn't be before January, I guess, right?
Right.
February
And
till
he
the
has-
fields are finished?
Exactly, that's correct.
Okay, one other question. Is 14 million to complete construction projects. That is still the same figure to date, 6 months later?
Yes, that is.
Thank you.
Along that line, Mr. Kelly, if, I think it would be helpful to the board, in lieu of the fact that it appears that we're at a deficit with our bond fund, I appreciate an itemization of our outstanding commitments, so that we have a heads up on what could possibly be impacted with our slated projects on hand.
That will be done, Mrs. Creeder.
Thank you.
Supplementary information starts on page 28. And again, that's just a line-by-line breakdown of the revenue and expenses from the prior pages. So those totals will go up to page 8 of the earlier financial statements. And again, that just breaks various captions down line item and comparing the budget with the actual for the year. We touched on most of the major changes in real estate taxes and the salaries and the other costs. Page 31 through page 44 are what's called the single audit reports, and these reports only relate to the federal financial programs that the district receives. The wording in these are word for word required by the federal government. And again, they only relate to about, the total revenue is $1.1 million at the tail end of page 33. And again, that's these reports only relate to the federal funds. There's certain compliance testing we're required to do, certain review of internal controls, specifically for the federal programs. Office of OMB comes out with audit guides requiring us to do certain testing of the Chapter 1 and the school lunch program, to test for eligibility and different reports that are kept. And we had no findings for the district on those federal programs. Looks like a lot of reports, but again, they only relate to federal programs only.
More questions? I want to go all the way back.
You can go first this time.
All right,
Tom.
back to page 7. I wasn't paying total attention on fund balances unreserved, $2,260,000. What did you say most school districts have, or what's the average as far as a percentage? What percentage is this, and what amount?
Target's usually from 3 to 5%.
3 to 5. Okay, and what percentage is this?
We have one that's up to 8%, and that's of general fund revenues. You're at 2.4.
Okay. We're at 2.4%.
Of general.
Okay.
Fund
I know you
revenues.
touched on that earlier, but I wanted to make note. Okay, let's start on this side. Questions?
I have a couple questions. Did you do an item audit of expenditures for bond funds?
We do a sampling of testing of expenditures out of that fund, yes. An audit doesn't include testing 100% of any of the funds, but we do a sampling from all the funds, yes.
Did you see any indication that we had bought a piece of property twice?
Not from our testing, no.
They would have been different years.
Well, you got to keep looking. Somebody says it's there. A question for Dennis, maybe. One of the things that helps anybody in business evaluate their business is not just the numbers for this year, but a comparison to see changes from years past. I can look at a number here and see $3 million, and I can't relate to it because I don't know what that tells me. It tells me $3 million, but it doesn't tell me that last year was 2 or last year was 6. So a lot of this is they're nice numbers, but they're irrelevant because I can't compare them. Is there any way we can start giving numbers and last year's numbers? Or are we making a report here that's out of line?
Well, no, we usually have given you that on the budget. When you get your budget document, I've tried to give you actuals for the past 3 years.
Yeah, but that's how many hundreds of pages? This kind of summarizes things real nice, that we can compare an auditor's report versus an auditor's report versus an auditor's report, and it will give us some relevant information if we can compare year to year.
Sure, that's fine. I mean, that's...
It's not a big problem to do?
No, now that we've computerized most of our financial records, that could easily be done.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
Before, when I first got here and everything was manual, that would have been a monumental job, but we can do that for you.
Okay.
Now, are you just talking about general fund or?
I don't know exactly what I'm talking about, which everybody will agree. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it means the balance sheets and maybe your numbers where you're comparing where your bond standing
the big
is,
numbers,
bond
balance sheets for all funds.
The balance sheets.
I don't want the budget again. I mean, that's ridiculous. But if we're having certain numbers audited, let's see those numbers year to year to year.
Fine.
Okay.
Isn't the last year's report in the same format as this year's report?
Yeah, I take them out.
The last 4 years, we brought Nellie Falconero 4 years ago.
You could go
That's what I do.
but it's a lot easier going page to page.
They don't want to have to find their copies from last year.
I don't want to admit I threw it out.
Are there key items that, something like the athletic fund with $3,000 in cash, I don't know if that's relevant. I mean, if there's certain funds that, since we have a lot of this on word processing, if we can pull it out quicker, we'd be glad to do that.
I wasn't prepared to ask the question until I saw the report. I saw it for the first time tonight. But
You want to pass that in to Dennis?
I can't answer the details of it, and it's not for me to decide. It's for 9 people to decide.
Okay.
But as a matter of general procedure, I'd like to put that on Dr. Bowe's list. You know, that monster list of things to do is
Finance list.
the accounting, again, is let us compare from one year to the next at one look, not having to have 4 different books here and find this item becomes a monstrous problem. Again, it's something for discussion by the board, future meeting. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, more questions from this side?
Okay. Put that down too. I take mine out and I compare them, so I'll probably be able to help you out, Dennis, as to which ones are key documents for comparisons if we're not duplicating the whole document. Tommy, you brought up about the fund balance, and as we were discussing the language here, where it talked about the reserve for the teacher's contract settlement, we were going back and forth on how clear that was, because it wasn't that it was designated necessarily to have been spent. It's that we had we were expecting a 6.8, and with hindsight and the Monday morning quarterbacking that the auditor is able to do now that he was reviewing it from after it was signed, that's where the money came from. That's what deducted it. At the time this budget was closed out, and as we formulated the new budget, we did expect there to be more money in that fund balance.
Okay.
But because the money was there, we of course, we had the financial obligations of the contract. It wasn't that the budget was designed with that low percentage of a fund balance. It's just until the contract was signed, no one knew how much
It was a guess.
would be
Educated
coming out.
guess.
And that's what we'll be dealing with later this year, because we're going to have the 95, 96 year compounding the fact that the anticipated revenues in the beginning balance don't really exist. Will be compounded with the effects of the contract in this year as we move through. So that'll be discussions that we're going to have as we begin to enter into the budget process.
Yeah, the unreserved fund balance is just, in corporate relations, just like retained earnings, prior earnings that are for emergencies or for unexpected expenditures. So 2.4% is relatively low.
And I have one general question.
Yes.
I'd like to ask you, we have a number of special funds. Is it legally acceptable to create a fund for your community education program, which now is covered under our instructional account? It's classified as instructional expenses. We have a student activities account that's outside, that's a separate fund. We have the cafeteria enterprise fund as a separate fund. Is there anything within the regulations of the accounting for the state that prevents us from having a separate fund for the adult education programs?
What's the source of most of the revenues for that group?
It is supposed to be totally self-supporting.
And it sounds like it's very similar to an enterprise fund where the fees are to support the program.
That's what that is the intent.
Yeah, that's a permitted use then.
So is it possible?
That could be captured as an enterprise fund, and then you would just have two enterprise funds then, food service and the
To
other.
provide a greater separation from the general fund.
Sure.
And there's nothing in the state accounting guidelines that you sometimes say this is how it has to be done.
No.
Okay, I'd like that for consideration, because it seems to me we separate out the expenses for our student activities, which is very related to the education of children, and yet adult programs, which includes tours, whether it's going to the Brandywine Museum or up to New York, is listed and added towards the instruction aspect of the budget. So, I'd like to see that when you're looking at your per pupil expenditures and what your dollar figures under the 1,000 account, it gives you this is something I think you have to pull out and realize that that's not dealing with the education of our pupils.
Yeah, probably a similar situation as the townships with their park and rec funds where they have different fees and things. Some put it as a special revenue since the revenue's from a different source. Some put it into the enterprise fund. And with the effort that the fees hopefully will cover any of their costs.
I think it would give us a little bit more separation. I think it would be beneficial for us for our record keeping also to develop that, and I'd like the board to consider
Can I
that.
ask a question about that?
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you with that.
That's okay, go ahead.
If we did that and we found out that we were either, I'll use the term, making a profit or losing money, could we put the profit back into the general fund? Or on the other hand, if we had to take money from the general fund to make up the loss?
Well, realistically, if you had a loss, there'd be accounts payable or resources needed from something, so you'd have a transfer probably from the general fund to cover that.
But there's no problem, just because you have an enterprise.
No, you could go
fund.
backwards too. I mean, you could, if there's a profit in that fund, transfer that back to the general fund.
Okay, thank you.
To be honest, Mr. Allen, in most school districts, their food service takes a loss, and in most financial statements, you'll see a line item that states that it transferred to the food service fund.
You know what I
But
think? That's part of why I'd like to see it. In other words, I'd like to see it clearly defined rather than perhaps a little transfer within the budget or whatever. I'd like to see that as a separate account and handle it 100% that way. And then if in fact the taxpayers of this community are contributing to adult programs or trips, then that would be something that we as a board should have a specific discussion on. I'm not saying it's occurring. I just think that it's when we have these other accounts that are so specific to our educational program, but the community ed program is one that I'd like to see that separation.
So you're saying, Mr. Sher, you want that even pulled out of the budget? That would not then become a budget discussion?
It would be as a cafeteria fund.
That's not part of the budget?
No.
Okay.
During the early years of my having this responsibility, I asked annually for exactly what Mrs. Sher is suggesting, and because I was interested in being able to accumulate a profit and carry it over and not lose the profit to the general fund. And I was told annually that I could not do that because the accounting code from the state required that adult education be in the general fund. So I'm not disputing the present interpretation. I'm just saying that I stopped asking after a while and haven't asked in recent years.
I see.
Well, you'll follow up on that, and if you find out anything differently, would you please come back to Dennis?
Right, because the codes are there in the
That's
state.
really for state reporting, but for your financial statements, you permitted to show things separately in different funds. Everything has to fall into certain categories when it goes into the state reporting, but it's the same total pot of numbers.
And if Ken does such a great job and he has a windfall, we can still raid his cupboard, right?
Transfers can go both ways.
Well, there's
services.
there's incentive to carry over a balance to the next year,
Sure, for
and then there's
development.
an incentive to assist you with your general fund. So, there's incentive either way.
Okay, Mr. Chair, any other questions?
Thank you.
Questions from this side? Don?
No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, let's swing over to this side.
Just a point, as I look through all your independent letters, they're all signed by a character called Maley, Falconeri and Company. And as Mr. Ware has been put to the test tonight in signing documents that the board probably won't wish you to do from here on out, I would think that a principal or a...
That's my signature on there as a partner for the firm.
And see, I thought you were Ed Furman. No, anyway, I'd like to see an individual. I'd like to see an individual's name as opposed to, and company. Yeah.
Okay, the firm has to sign also as the accounting firm of record for the district.
So 2 signatures wouldn't be difficult.
No, that's correct.
Thank you. Also, just it might not even be a question suitable for you, and maybe one for the future solicitor, but. Do we have any state requirement in terms of the district's liability for the proper handling and necessary nonprofit licensure for those home and school accounts that each school seems to have? I understand from a woman who is an accountant that was involved with the home and school in one of our elementaries that she was most alarmed at how those individual accounts not only raise money, but how they do not report and how they don't have licenses for solicitation as required by the state, et cetera, as nonprofit organizations go.
To be honest, I'd have to check on the individual club reporting requirements or organization requirements on the solicitation.
Okay. Well, just list that as a question that I have.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, that's it, Mr. President.
Okay, Sharice?
Just in regards to general recommendations, Mr. Furman and Mr. Kelly, at the present time, the district does not have a accounting manual?
No, Mrs. Krieger, we don't. Most districts really don't have one. That's a goal that many of them have, but it's finding the time and the personnel in order to get it done.
That's usually done in steps also, where you can, pick the general fund or certain items and work on that as a piecemeal basis.
If anything were to happen to you, Mr. Kelly, and you were able to report
It's
to work.
looking good. Yes.
We would resuscitate him.
Leave a note.
If you were not able to report to work, Mr. Kelly, is there anybody in your department at the present time or in the school district that would be able to carry out your duties and know where to find
Full data entry?
Tony would probably be able to find things for you, but if she's not here.
I think that this is a significant recommendation that this board needs to act on.
Well, it
as
would
soon as possible.
allow the board to, document certain of the policies that they want to see.
Okay. And just a final comment on that. I think it's very important that within these general recommendations, I don't see anything in regards to the capital bond fund and the fact that we have $14 million committed with only $12 million as of June 30th. I would have liked to have seen recommendations on how this board should proceed in order to make the commitments, be able to pay those commitments, and I think that would be in order.
Well, in all fairness, that's not really an audit. That's not an auditor's decision. That's really a decision left up to you members of the board.
Financial advisor also.
Right. There's a note in there that states about that there's $14 million in contracts that have been let and only $12 million. I mean, the auditors did their duty in informing you through the note process that situation exists, but that's incumbent on you to decide what you're going to do at this point.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Dennis, that was as of June 30th. At this point, aren't you saying somewhere between $3.5 to $5 million?
Right. When we looked at that $500,000 really wasn't that we paid to Mr. Breslin wasn't taken into consideration, and we're in the process of reevaluating exactly where we are. I estimate we're going to need about, of the $7 million spent on the land, I think it'll be closer to $5 million that we're going to need.
On this bond money, don't we maintain the same kind of summary accounting that we do for, that we receive monthly? In other words, you have a listing of your bond balance, you have a listing of, you know, of your bond balance as well as your encumbered amount and paid to date, et cetera, so that at any given time, someone can go there and know that what our exact commitments are as far as actual known and established commitments, whether they've been paid out or whether they're forthcoming, you know, they're coming in the future. If the bed, in other words, with bids or anything else that's been committed to that money, Breslin, he's been paid. He's been paid all the way along in this $5,500,000. The last one was actually in October. I would think at any given time we could go to the bond accounts and know what their actual balance, without a lot of gray areas except for unexpected expenses that come in.
Right. To be honest, it's Art Secretary Marie is doing it manually. She has ledger sheets that have amounts on them, but it takes a little bit to get done. Well, we had given the board that report before, but that's not on an ongoing basis. Okay.
Well, we'll leave this for after Mr. Furman's finished. Well, I have an end of the year finance report and recommendations I'd like to follow, but I don't need to tie him up any longer.
Sure. Hey, let's keep going as far as
moving.
Sharice, any other questions?
No.
David? Pat?
No questions.
Okay, now, before you comment on the end of the year, Vicki, do we have?
I can let him.
Let's open it
finish.
up to the audience
Sure.
of citizens. One remark I want to make is that Mr. Furman, I think in fairness to the community, that when we do get the next report, that we will have the full-fledged report to hand to the community the same night that we review it. So we can have that for next year.
Okay. That's on me. That's right on Mr. Furman.
Are there any extra copies of these tonight, or are there just enough for the board?
They provide us with 30 copies, 9 for the board, and then there's a number that have to get sent to government agencies.
Okay, are there any extras for tonight that could be handed out afterwards to any person in the community that will first come, first serve?
It depends on how many. There's some of the draft copies.
There's draft mailing out.
I just want to try to, I felt Mr. Anderson had a fair request. I want to try to do what I can to get you that information.
He doesn't even want to.
Dennis, if before you use the draft copies, change that $139 million, page 24, or 25.
Mine's derotated.
It's just somebody, can we see a show of hands if anybody's
Yeah,
interested
if
in?
anybody wants them, here's some comments.
Many of the
Right
pages
here. Go
are-
up and get 'em.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is my, whoever wants this copy, here's mine. We'll try to do our best to get out. If anyone wants a copy, here they are.
I got it.
What's that?
I wrote John's a jerk.
Why not?
Take it
I
first.
wrote all mine.
I don't know.
Do you want my autograph?
Mine aren't clean anymore.
Mine aren't either.
Okay. Now, not on that one.
Come on.
Again, questions or comments from the audience? Mr. Anderson?
I have to change
How
my
we're going
number.
to,
Here's one here if you want to.
yeah, Mr. Furman, maybe you can just stay right where you are.
Stand there. There you go.
I just have a couple of very quick ones. First of all, on page 8, I'd like to know why the proceeds of the sales of assets are returned to the general fund. I would think they'd first go towards the obligations we probably incurred to buy those fixed assets, like reduction of bond principal or something like that. Otherwise, you have a conversion of assets, don't you? You've bought something maybe with bond money, and then you return it to the general fund. You've actually, theoretically used the money in a way that wasn't intended by the purposes of the bond fund.
Absolutely.
Right,
Is that
Mr.
typical,
Anderson.
and should we maybe change that?
That was brought up last year. That was
Okay.
part of the budget process, and that was the sale of the land over at Gwinnett Square. Gwinnett Square surplus land that was sold. So that was discussed last year, and the board opted to include it in with the budget.
Is that our general policy, or?
It's not one that we have liked, but
Right.
it was the prevailing policy.
That will-
In the past, it's a part of also what I would suggest that we change some of the policies so that we're not maintaining the debt and we have the taxpayers paying for items and property that they don't
Have been
own.
disposed of
Right.
by that point.
That
I think
they
it's
don't-
happened so infrequently that there is no real board
Okay.
policy.
On page 9, I was just wondering, there's one really significant variance, which was the state subsidy. What happened there, and is that going to keep happening? Much
No,
less
that was
other state subsidy than we had anticipated.
That was a one-year aberration. There was a subsidy paid for special education for last year that was included in last year's money and budgeted in this year, so that's why it looks as though we didn't get the money, but we did receive it.
As far as our fixed assets, do other districts use, it's mentioned as an accounting anomaly, and but something that a lot of school districts do. Do other districts use a true cost of fixed assets and then accumulate depreciation against them? Does the school district have a choice there to provide a more accurate view of the value of its assets? Have we just made a particular choice, or does every school district tend to do things that way?
Virtually 95% of the school districts recorded at replacement value. And the only fixed assets you're permitted to depreciate under accounting principles are fixed assets that you have a price on.
Okay, so we couldn't do that. We're not allowed to by the state. Does that mean that we don't really have a true idea then of how our borrowings and so forth have eventually been converted into buildings? Because the buildings keep going up in value on the basis of the fact that their replacement value goes up, whether or not the actual value of the building is going up, which of course it's not. It's really depreciating over time, isn't it?
Well, replacement should be, I believe we use that for insurance purposes.
That's correct.
Okay. And then lastly, is there any kind of accounting of bond series versus the projects that they were primarily undertaken to fund, or is it all sort of lumped into one big fund and then paid out on construction draws against that fund? Prior to 1989, all of our contracts basically said, we're taking out this money and we're going to use it for this project, and then after that we inserted some language that sort of lets the matter get a little slushier. I guess I'm just asking internally, do we account for things that way? Do we say, I guess this goes back to Mr. Mosey's question earlier, we borrowed $20 million or something in 1990. Did we ever account specifically for whether or not that was used to pay for the projects that are stated on the face of the official statement? Or is it all just sort of lumped into one big fund and then draws are taken from that irrespective of the project that they're actually assigned to? Which way, the question is, which way do we account there? Is it one massive fund that just occasionally there's money in whenever new money is borrowed and then it comes out, or is it accounted for, are the draws accounted for according to the fund that the money went into when the bonds were initially
Right now it's done by school, and it's kind of a first in, first out. I mean, there were as stated earlier, there were approved bond expenses that came out of 90 and 92 for the land. That expense is in neither bond issue, really. It was done because the money was there at the time.
Okay, so there's not a formal accounting that the money is actually spent in the way that was intended and what was promised to the bond purchasers, right? The people who actually accepted our debt sort of expected the money was going to be used for certain purposes that may or may not be true, and we don't account specifically for whether.
Well, one of the fallacies with the bond issues were there's when you look at them, there was no actual budget attached to any of them. As you saw when you looked at it, there's no budget attached, so it's awfully hard to put a figure to something where there's no budget.
Okay.
I mean, there were certain projects and certain aspects talked about, but there's no actual budget dollars, so there's no way that you can list a budget and what was spent against that.
Okay, is that possibly why we find ourselves in the position that we're in
It's
today?
definitely the reason, yeah. So
Okay.
that's one thing we hope to correct.
Okay, thank you.
Something's going to change, right?
More questions or comments?
Anita Shermer, yes, I hear my name ricocheting around. I think I'm stunned by the way business is done in a school board. I've worked in companies in logistics and planning, and I'm going to take a positive stature here, if that's possible. I feel like all of you guys just came in to the school board whenever you came in, and things were set up a certain way to do and that's the way it's always been done. And I'm surprised at it. I think it's terrific, Bill, what you said, comparisons. I'm in awe that you have a report here and you don't have like 93, 94, 95, 96, whatever school year it is, and have the comparisons so that at a glance, that's the way business is done. This is the way one does one's monthly, yearly fiscal reporting. And to have monies that are not spelled out what it's for. I just really think if it was set up that way and whoever came in and took over and just said, well, this is the way it was done and this is the way we'll have to do it, I understand that, but I hope to God that the persons involved in the finances of the board are going to clean this mess up, because you know what? If this were a business, you'd be in deep, not knowing where the money is, what it's for, and not being able to show. I mean, if the IRS came in, I was just listening on Irv Homer, you know, you wouldn't have a snowball's chance in Hades.
I do have to take exception with that, Mr. Shermer, to be honest with you. I think what you're doing is leading people to believe that there's, again, some type of deception.
No, I'm saying
Well,
it's not clear.
When you're saying it's not clear, it means you're almost saying that it's muddled on purpose. And I really have to admit I'm very proud of the work we do here. I think all the dollars are accounted for accurately. It may not be in the format which you understand. One of the things you asked for, as I stated earlier, is in the budget. If you want to look at comparisons year to year, if you look at the budget document, there'll be a 3 or 4 year comparison there for you. This audit, if you've been to any other school district, this is the format that all school districts use.
That's what I'm questioning. It's business is not accepted. We don't do this way in business. I'm questioning. I'm saying you apparently this is the way it was set up when you guys walked into whatever.
Well, I think it's set up that way in 501 school districts here in the Commonwealth.
And I also have to disagree. This is a very acceptable business practice. This is a year-end audit. This is not the budget. This is a year-end audit, and this is the way businesses do a year-end audit. It is a report. That is the way businesses work.
I think in a lot of things are very, very ambiguous, and I just think they could be worded. I'm not saying the facts aren't there, but you're not showing them. And if IRS, when I say IRS, I'm talking about like we personally, you know, we get in trouble because we can't show it. We know it's there. It's just the format. And I'm questioning the way it's formatted. And I would ask you to.
Thank you for your comments. 3 minutes are up.
Thank you.
Your point's well taken. Chuck.
Chuck Hammond from Montgomery Township. I agree with everybody else also. I get many, many annual reports, and Dennis, you did a good job. Mr. Auditor, nice report. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Robinson.
Get ready.
Gary Robinson, Hatfield Township. Question, Mr. Clemens. Is the Malley-Falconero contract a public record?
I'll turn that over to Mr. Kelly.
Yes, it is. It was publicly bid and publicly awarded, and
I've asked for it before. Can I get a review it and
Sure.
get a copy of it?
Sure.
Wonderful. Observation. I seem to see a much greater similarity between these so-called annual audits and what is merely referred to as a corporation's annual report. I question whether, as I have repeatedly for a long time, whether these in fact really constitute true audits. And that's it. And I have one final comment in response to Mr. Allen's previous question, Mr. Firmer, whether he had found any indication of the district buying a piece of land twice. If he was referring to my previous criticisms, my criticisms of the school district was that the second school plan, talking about a proposed $41 million bond, if it was carried through, would in fact constitute a second or duplicate borrowing for the same purchase, not a second duplicate purchase. If you're going to make such comments, Mr. Allen, at least get your facts correct.
Any other questions or comments?
I'd like to thank Mr. Furman for his patience today as we had as he sat through the opening of the meeting. Traditionally, we do try to have the auditor give his report first in respect for the professional time and also so everyone's able to sit back and digest the information. And thank you for coming.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Kelly, do we need to take any action on this or?
No action. It's just
The
a
vote
report
to
to the
accept
board.
will come on the action meeting. We will approve the audit
Okay.
at the next action meeting. Well, Mr. Furman's name,
Well, give Bill, you want to talk about year end, correct?
Right,
So let
finance.
Bill,
I would like to comment on one of the recommendations, and that is the accounting practices manual, if you would, or procedures. And what I would also like to do is have us give thought to having some outside accountants, CPAs and such, work with us on doing this so that we have a lot of expertise on something like this. I don't think this is an in-house project. I think we need a lot of help
okay.
to give it legitimacy.
I think Mrs. Scher may want to, you might have beat her to the
Right,
punch.
I've been hearing little pieces of what I'm about to say coming out of members
Thanks,
of the
Bill.
audience and other board members. That's quite all right. It just goes to show that there is a little bit more consensus here than some people may have you believe.
Mrs. Scher, would you like
Mr. Furman can
here
go.
for
You do not have to stay unless you're just so comfortable in Fred's seat that you want to sit there. That,
Yeah, I just want to make comment. As part of finance and audit report, Mrs. Scher has requested that she bring us an up-to-date year-end report. And so I turn it over to Mrs. Scher.
This is, of course, the time of the year when we change committee assignments, and being the district liaison, the board liaison to finance, I thought I would like to give an end-of-the-year report along with some of the initiatives I'd like to see us make. There have been different comments made over the past year or two, and actually some of these have been live complaints for many, many years. It isn't that we've been used to doing business as usual, but as all of you may realize, there's been a different philosophy with the previous board than what sits here today. And so the concerns regarding the bond funds and the use of those bond funds and the practices of feeding the profits from bond money into the general fund rather than applying them against principal has been something that some of us as individuals have certainly decried, but did not carry the vote as far as stopping it. What I'd like to say here now is during the past year, several positive changes have taken place to strengthen the financial management of the school district. First, under Mr. Kelly's leadership and the support of his clerical assistant, Tony Hannessy, the Finance Department has transformed its record-keeping process from manual to computerized documentation. This particular effort has been ongoing since Dennis became Director of Finance, but I must remind everyone, playing catch-up with the past has had to take a back seat to just keeping up with the present. He's working towards bringing past facts of relevance into the computer system, but we can only expect him to do so much at one time. The use of funds from long-term bond borrowing to purchase supplies has been greatly curtailed over the past year, but the compounded effects of this past practice are something that we must continue to deal with. 3, as of this current budget year, a March 1st deadline was placed on purchase orders to bring greater accountability and accuracy to the budget planning and spending process. Many of you may not realize it, but our employees were required to get their purchase orders in by March 1st, or the funding was gone. This was to prevent a last-minute feeding frenzy to gobble up budgets so that they could protect the increases that would come if the money was fully expended on the books. 4, expenditures made outside the general fund have been given a higher level of scrutiny than ever before. Issuance costs are disclosed prior to approval of a bond transaction. Itemized lists of all areas of legal services have been developed. And since June, Dennis Kelly has attempted to acquire proof of all past disbursements, i.e. the canceled checks that have been made on the behalf of the district from bond proceeds by its outside agents. This is information that we have not possessed. With these and other accomplishments and concerns in mind, I would like to bring forward some recommendations that I would like individual board members to consider for implementation in the upcoming year. They were developed under the philosophy that Mr. Kelly is the Board of School Directors' financial advisor and manager, not a bookkeeper. First, I'd like to recommend that zero-based budgeting for the development of the 1996 to 97 budget be approved and moved forward. It doesn't require a formal vote, but I would like to have the consensus of the majority of the board to support that movement. 2, all items of financial consequence not previously approved by the Board of School Directors should be evaluated by the Director of Finance and forwarded to the Board. Someone and one person only must be given the direct responsibility of ensuring that this board is fully informed of all activities and programs that involve the expenditure, receipt, or formal commitment of district funds, and should be responsible for ensuring that they're formally processed. This would involve the full bidding process, from the letting of bids to the acceptance of bids to the disbursement of the bond money that it is coming from. The purchase orders, service contracts, I believe we've heard that here earlier tonight, committee budgets, and program changes. While Dr. Bose is certainly brought into this process, I do believe, though, we do have to have one person accountable, because if there's too much autonomy within the different departments, no one is accountable. All expense reimbursement practices not validated by formal policy, contract, or vote should be brought to the board for consideration. This includes bond borrowing, being restricted to the intended projects for which the debt was incurred, and clearly stated bond borrowing documents which clearly conveys the intent of the board. I believe a policy should be developed to prohibit the letting of bids that exceed the level of funds available. The effectiveness and efficiency of the finance department would be greatly enhanced by the addition of an assistant that has an experience in financial management. If Dennis is sick, there's no one to take his place, and yet the district has to keep going, and bills still have to be paid. It's also important for everyone to remember we at one time had a business manager as well as a director of finance. Basically, that was condensed into one position, while the district has continued to take on more and more areas of finance, including the benefits cafeteria program that we have now, which does go through finance. And last but not least, an independent auditing firm should be contracted to perform a detailed systems analysis of the North Penn School District's financial infrastructure that provides a 10-year project-by-project history of all bond disbursements and an evaluation of our general accounting practices. Through this, I would like to see the creation of a general accounting manual and advisement towards the development of a 5-year financial management plan. I would assume this financial management plan and the advice that comes would also be incorporated into our and considered through our strategic planning committee that we're going to embark on soon. I mean, there are many other issues that have come up over the past, but these are some of the very basic changes in broad policy that I believe we do need to give serious thought to and bring a higher level of accountability to what's coming through the finance department, which is just about everything that happens in this district. Whether someone's buying a box of tissues, or whether they're taking out a $25 million bond, or whether an employee is attending a nighttime school event, there's generally an expense slip that eventually has to find its way to the finance department to be paid. And I'd like to see this given serious thought by the new board liaison in finance if there's a change or whatever.
We will have new liaison assignments tonight, and you will be the finance liaison. We'll tell you that now.
Do I have some board support?
Any other questions or comments on our audit and finance report?
I just have a quick question.
I'm just where I
I'm
wrote
sorry
it.
if I'm
and I'll get
the
to
hours late.
It is getting late.
I noticed that in the very front, where was that? There was a cover sheet that told who the board members were and who the officers were, who the non-members were, and I noticed George Starkey's name there as the treasurer for the North Penn School District.
He is treasurer, Mrs. Sawyer.
It's on page 5.
Does he receive a salary for that?
No.
It isn't much. It's $100 maybe? Is it $100?
We haven't paid him anything. We haven't paid him anything.
Is it just in name only, or does he serve some purpose?
We use his signature.
Right.
What
He
is the signature
had
in
volunteered when he left to remain as treasurer of the board, and the board went along with that request.
What does the treasurer do, Dennis?
He actually
just
signs
curious.
off on this,
Oh.
He what?
believe it or not.
He's just a signature on the signature plate with Mr. Clements and Mr. Weir. There are 3 signatures on every check, the board president, the board secretary, and the board treasurer.
Okay, for the checks. Okay. All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the audit and finance?
Wouldn't dare.
We're afraid.
Thank you, Dennis.
Check, but we're doing
Mr. Furman.
everything fine.
Thank you, Mr. Furman.
Another subcommittee, I don't
No,
want
it's
to.
not.
Okay, moving on. Moving on. Now we are coming back to item number 1. Excuse me, item number 2, which we pushed down to the agenda for the work session. And I would like to turn that over to Dr. Bose to bring the board up to date on the recommendation. And I think what we'll do tonight is we will talk about it, we'll get discussion, and I'll seek consensus to see then if there is consensus to put it on for the action meeting on next Thursday night.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would begin with the obvious, and that is to refer the board to the document it received Friday, if I remember correctly, and particularly to the analysis of the Pennsylvania State Board of Education rules and regulations, which brings us in all school districts in the Commonwealth to the obligation to develop a long-range or a strategic plan. We are essentially 2.5 years behind schedule. We were in phase 3, which was the last phase, where plans developed by all the school districts in phase 3 were to be presented to Harrisburg in September of 1996 for approval by the Department of Education. And we're going to try to do, essentially in 8 months, what would have been done in 3 years. So we have a big task ahead of us. And what I proposed for your consideration is a plan that I believe will bring us into compliance and also do something I know the board is interested in doing, which is to develop a long-range plan which focuses on student standards and what it is we want the students who traverse our schools and graduate during their senior year to have learned. What does a diploma from North Penn High School represent? What is it that are the targets and the results we expect kids to accomplish as a consequence of attending school in North Penn? And so, without insulting you with a recapitulation of what I know you've already read, maybe it's better that I answer any questions you might have, and also tell you, since we've agreed to delay any action on this until the 21st of December, your regular action meeting, I will send you Friday a detailed summary of the budget and how I propose that this would be financed, with an explanation of how it would be financed and what we project it to cost. So that can be done Friday, and you can follow up questions to me directly, or wait if you choose until the action meeting when it will reappear as a matter for a decision on your part. If you consent, as Mr. Clemens suggested, to having it appear on the action agenda for the 21st. Again, I know this is a short explanation, but it's a long night. And certainly, to the extent that you have questions, we can extend it, and I'll respond to those questions directly. It's, I guess now, as we used to say in Indiana, the ball's in your court.
I know the night's late, but I still think we should open it up for questions. Let's start on this side for questions. Pat?
I was glad to hear you mention the budget, Dr. Bose, because that was one thing that I thought was missing from this report. I had this, I guess we're talking about a 5-year plan?
6.
6 years.
The code requires the development of a 6-year plan renewed every year. So maybe, Pat, your way of expressing it is more practical, in that if you renew it every year, you'll be renewing it 1 year into it, so you're actually looking 5 years ahead.
Well, my reason for asking that was that if we're going to have something like 8 action teams with 20 people each, and we're going to have a steering committee of 32 people, we're talking close to 200 people that are going to be working on this. I assume that we're going to have staff as well as community people, business people, the way it's outlined in here. So
we're required by the code to involve the staff, students, parents, community members, administrators, and board. That's in the code.
And my reason for asking about 5 years, and you corrected me with 6, thank you. They will be coming back to us strictly with recommendations, or is what they decide to do is going to be cast in stone and we just approve it?
You have the final say, even to the point that we will be required to give the public an opportunity to review the proposed long-range plan 1 month in advance of its adoption. So our expectation would be we would finish the first draft in August, present it to the public for consideration, comes to you in September for the final approval, which means, in effect, you can amend it as well as accept it as it's presented. But in any event, when you adopt it, it's the board's long-range plan.
Okay. Who will be selecting the committee members?
We will ask the board for help and advice. The composition is pretty much dictated by the statute, and that probably increases the numbers too. And on the one hand, we might think that 200 people working on such a plan is too much. On the other hand, we might say that ensures community representation. So Dr. Mangano and I would work on a suggested composition and present it to the board for final approval, which we'd like to do in January, so assuming that the board would take an action on this proposal on the 21st of December.
Any of our union employees that serve in these various committees, will they be paid?
They will not be paid to serve on the committees.
Okay. And the last question I had was...
Therefore, Pat, excuse me, they have to be volunteers.
Thank you. And the last question I had was in concerning Dr. Mangano. I noticed that we're going to be moving her to a level 9 with approximately a $17,000 increase. Is someone going to be assuming her responsibilities while she is going to be the chief facilitator, or does she move back after this project is over?
It's an acting position, and the appointment would be until September of '96, when the project would be done. So it's an acting position. In her absence, I've asked Mrs. Clark to develop a plan that would cover the critical elements of her responsibility while she assumed this assignment, and to give that to me without considering any additional personnel, but perhaps assigning the critical responsibilities to others. The reality here is we're behind the 8 ball.
I knew.
So we've got to do a lot of catch up, and we're going to try to do it without adding any additional personnel. So, in honesty, some things are going to be sacrificed in that interim, but they will be low priority items, and the high priority items will be accomplished by having other people pitching in and perhaps giving them some stipend for helping do additional work beyond their current assignments. But we're not considering adding any people.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I realize we're behind the 8 ball, but my concern is that we don't do a halfway. We do as comprehensive and as good a job as we can.
I think that's key.
And I do too. And I would just like you to, and the information that you're going to give to us on Friday, if you would be so kind also to, I'd like to have things in writing, because I don't like things perhaps coming down the road a few months or a year from now, and all of a sudden we're responsible because we've made a decision and we don't have any substantiation to that. If you would be good enough to put that in there as to what you intend to do as far as Dr. Mangano moving back to her position and so forth. If you would spell that out for us, I would appreciate that.
I will do that.
Thank you. That's all the questions, Mr. President.
Thank you.
To continue with the theme of behind the eight ball, if we can, for a second. I'm concerned we do have a compressed time frame, and we have an awful lot to get done. My concerns relate to, other than staff and, shall we say, perhaps board members, the volunteers that are going to be asked to serve on this. In some cases, half the members of the committee will be community members, is that we may run into a problem with people scheduling their time to be able to contribute effectively. The only thing I'd like to suggest is we take a look at the core members of those committees. They may wind up doing much of the work, and I think we ought to be very much aware of that and decide how we intend to approach that with this short period of time that we have to work with.
That's a good point.
Okay. Anything else? Therese?
Okay, I have a couple of questions, which I did cover with Dr. Bose the other day, but since that time, I had a couple more come up, so I'd just like to present them now. Clarification can come either now or later. First of all, I'm a little perplexed as to why it is now necessary to advance, I believe Dr. Mangano was a supervisor at the present time, which the last strategic planner that we had who left in January was at a supervisorial rate, which was less than what Mrs. Mangano is presently making now. And I don't have a problem with compensating any employee, Dr. Bose, for added requests for duty. What I do have a problem with, though, is an entry fee or payment of $85,000, which is in the budget for the director of curriculum. It was in there for this in the final budget for this year, but yet we had no director of curriculum. If this is a temporary job, in fact, if that is what it is, I don't have a problem compensating somebody with, as you have already stated, a stipend for added duties. And I would like the board to consider that instead of a new cabinet-level director's position, because historically, Dr. Bose, in this district, when a director has opted out of cabinet, out of directorial duties, and go back to previous position in this district, they take their director salaries with them. And that is just simply historically what has happened here in the past. And my concern is that could happen in the future.
I don't feel bound by history.
Well,
in fact, I think that's what Mr. Mosey was talking about when he wanted those written assurances. I have no problem assuring you of that, because there's no intent to do anything but that.
I think perhaps the language of salary versus stipend. Traditionally, when they're using acting positions, they list them as stipend rather than an actual payroll.
That's where my concern comes in.
It's a problem changing it to stipend?
No problem.
Okay,
We call it a
the
stipend.
employee, the board, and the community needs to know that this is a position of temporary manner. Also, I would like to propose that in regards to the appointments to this committee, that an application process be implemented for this district. Time and time again, over many, many years, we see the same faces turning up to serve on our committees. And I would like to give them a more open process opportunity to the community, whether we have to, put in notices in the newspaper, or, be a little bit more high profile in the newspaper, do some stories ourselves, do a little bit better PR in regards to this. I'd also like to see that. I also would like to see 4 board members assigned to serve on this committee instead of 2. I'd like to know who is the supervisor, or where is the supervisor coming from that is proposed to serve on this planning steering committee. And let's see, I had a couple more. I'd also like to see either, I can do this in a phone conversation with Dr. Mangano. I could get it in writing, however you would like to do this. I'd like to have some kind of written documentation or something about her previous technical knowledge of planning. I think that would be the most helpful for me. And I'd also like to know, and as you've already indicated, and I support that, the full financial picture of this process, including any increase in support or other stipends that are proposed. And finally, I would like some justification on the necessity to increase the secretary's salary by $3,050.23 for service on this committee, and whether or not that too is a stipend, and only a temporary amount of money for service on the committee. Thank you.
Or is that one?
We'll call that a stipend.
Got all those?
That's it.
Okay, I want to talk with one part as far as when I will give out committee assignments tonight, and as far as on long-range planning, I do have Tom Clemens, Donna Mengel, Vicki Scher, and David White. I'll be getting into it later, but there will be 4 people serving on that committee, 4 board members.
Great.
Okay. Any other questions over here? Oh, Donna?
Just a quick comment that having been here for maybe longer than most of the board members placed tonight, I have absolute complete confidence and admiration for Sandy Mangano. I have viewed various administrators in 4 years that I had wished to see moved along and accelerated and advanced here in the district. I have always wished that whenever there was a new position in the district that we look in-house and move people along and develop not only a bench but develop varsity players when it comes to needs in the district. I think Dr. Bond and Dr. Sugar are indicative of that trend. So I'm eager to have Sandy get to work and find that when Mrs. Krieger gets the information about Sandy's background, that she will be impressed and pleased. Also, in light of the additional stipend that she will receive, I believe it's only fair in light of the stipend provided to these 2 gentlemen here, Dr. Sugar and Dr. Bond, when their appointments were made. I believe that this board is going to crunch down on the monies that are going to be given for extra work around here, and I think that is going to be a trend forthcoming, but I certainly wouldn't want to see it start tonight with a female. The other thing, last, I'd like to place on the record that I would recommend to planning from the community a Daniel Litley. Dan is known by many of us here. He was, in his professional and military career, a strategist and a logistician, and I think he would be a great asset, and would like to place him on tonight. Simple recommendation as one board member. Thank you, Mr. President.
Does he know you did that?
He asked me
You
to.
committed him?
He asked me to. I keep my promises. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. John, any comments?
Can I ask a question?
Bill?
No.
Hey, Don?
Only comment I have, most of the things were covered. During the course of this task of putting this together, I would appreciate at least an overview monthly as where we are and what we're doing. I don't expect this to be a long, drawn-out thing, but I'd like to have a feel for how we're progressing in this task over the next 9 months, and maybe at a certain strategic points as you move through that, a little more detail. But like on any plan that we're going to invest an amount of funds on, and something important to the district is this, I think we should keep the community as well as the board advised where we are on the plan, if we're on schedule or off schedule.
We can do that.
Don, I see that as an advantage of her being brought up to the cabinet level for that specific period of time, keeping her close to us. I think is an added advantage to checking on her on a monthly basis as to progress.
Okay,
Vicki?
First, one of the comments you made regarding the committee, that we were going to deal with strictly those who volunteer. If they didn't want to volunteer, there wouldn't be, they can simply not serve and not participate and seek their representation. However, I would say on the recommended composition of the Planning Steering Committee, you might want to reconsider that you've designated the MPEA president by the title of his office. You may want to clearly just simply articulate that as a union representative. That's way it's open to if there's a union representative that without a special request wishes to participate, or we may find ourselves in a grievance process. And on this committee, the steering committee, I too wanted to know the selection of the community. What we're dealing with 14 staff members, and it was designated as 2 board members. That'll now change to 4. Given the fact, that we're going to have 8 task force, that certainly is still very ambitious for the 4 of us representing the board there to keep up with. The 2 students. So we'll be counting the 14 board members. I guess along with the 2 students, we'll bring it 16 to 16 equivalency in the breakdown. I too would suggest serious consideration over the process of those community member selection. In dealing with the budget and looking through this, I believe the evaluation that we receive has to take in consideration the substitute days that are listed here. I see utilized substitutes for release time meeting days, which is expected to be 6 for 3 staff members. That myself, is $1,440, and then there's other release time, which I do not know if there's going to be any associated days expected there. As I went through, I was actually very happy to see Sandy named to this. I think I can echo Donna's sentiments regarding her professional and work ethics. However, in all the conversations I've had with various boards who have already gone through this process, and I will concur that they didn't have the exact ticking clock and timelines that we're running under. I never heard of someone actually being elevated specifically to a cabinet level or such a high change rather than as a lateral move or with a move in which it was taken on as an additional task, not actually vacating their title and the position that they hold. And I do have concern over that. I have concern that there are people sitting at this table right now that are members of cabinet that aren't being paid what you're recommending for Mr. Moreno. And again, it's not a lack of confidence. It is a job that it is the head a committee. And yet many of the job responsibilities and duties are far more diverse and far more extended than at least a single focus job responsibility. And I guess what would have helped me as I look through these long-range planning numbers that you gave me where it compares Souderton with the cost of the facilitator, and you see the stipends of $3,500, of $3,000, of $8,000. You don't really know whether or not they maintained all of their other responsibilities. You don't know if they were a $50,000 employee with a $8,000 stipend or a $45,000 or $60,000.
They were all people who were not employed by those school districts.
Dr. Marion Dugan was definitely employed at Souderton. That was her position,
No, but you're looking
Director of Curriculum.
at the external facilitator. This is internal facilitator.
Well, what is this fee for?
For the external facilitator.
Oh, that is not for
That's the
the
hired
internal.
consultant, right?
Okay, then are we intending to use any of these external facilitators,
No.
Cambridge
No,
Management?
and
any of them?
Vic, Mrs. Scheer, you raised a good question, and I think I heard it from 1 or 2 others too. Why acting director? Well, taking into account that we have a little amount of time to do what was originally provided over 3 years, and knowing that it's going to be intense, and the person in charge of shepherding this planning process through to some successful culmination has to have a little clout and a little respect and be able to command attention where otherwise somebody other than a director might not be able to do that. Has to be able to sit in cabinet and engage the cabinet and keep the cabinet up to date, as well as your suggestion here has already been contemplated that the person in charge be at this meeting on a regular basis as an acting director, and as Mr. Hill suggested, at least make monthly reports. on how things are going. Hence, the conclusion to recommend that this individual be an acting director for the term of the assignment, so that the responsibility and the authority match up, considering again that we don't have 3 years to do this. We have 8 months. What was the third question?
Could, in considering your budget, could you please at that time make a commitment as to whether or not there will be any other staff compensation to pick up any of the responsibilities that
I will do that.
Ms. Mangano vacates?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to make just one comment related to that subject, is that I believe that the superintendent has a responsibility to get this long-range planning done, and if he believes, and I concur, that he believes that the person that's doing this needs that status, needs to be elevated to a cabinet position, and it needs to get this job in a short time, then I support that, based upon the discussion we had, that when this is over, it all goes back to where it was before. We're not creating a new position. But I believe that if that's what the superintendent believes he needs and what this job takes, then I support that position.
Okay, one more time, over to this side.
No.
Okay, any more questions or comments over here?
Put it on the agenda.
Okay, there's consensus to put it on the agenda?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, when there's consensus, thank you. I want to open it up to comments to the audience. Mr. Anderson?
Thanks, I'll try to be very brief. I concur with the assessment of Dr. Mangano, is that if anybody in the school district can do this, she's the one. But I have a question. Has she done this before? Have we been through this process with any of our people internally before?
She's had training experience. She does a lot of work for a national association, and it involves planning. And she's had some planning training, which was one of the original attractions to her as a person to fulfill this acting position.
Is it, though, experience in the specific process which is mandated by the state at this time?
The state's process isn't as specific, for instance, as the Cambridge Management Corporation's process. It's more generic, Mr. Anderson, and therefore does not require, for instance, if you do the Cambridge model, you have to be trained by the Cambridge people. What we're doing won't require that. Cuts the cost and will speed it up somewhat.
My concern was just given the limited amount of time, if we're going to have to train ourselves on how to do the process, I'd prefer to see you bring in an outsider who has done this once in Pennsylvania that can tell you how to get going and hit the ground running, because otherwise you waste a couple months figuring out whether you're doing it the right way.
The outsider that was brought in to at least frame the original vision statement, mission statement, and goals was somebody from Michigan who came,
91.
4 years ago.
91.
So we're going to try to use that data to the extent that some of the people that helped develop it will confirm it's still vital and current.
Okay.
But that's the extent of any outside help, because we're trying to cut the cost.
Okay. Secondly, since this is not part of what's in the community packet, how many total community members are involved in the process? What does the count work out to?
I think it's 14.
But no, there will be on your teaming, but there's an action team.
That's the steering committee, that's right.
The steering committee is 14.
There'll be up to 200 on all the various subcommittees.
160.
And so how many of those 200 would be community members?
There's no game plan on that yet.
That's yet to be developed.
Okay. My concern, and when would they need to get started? Are they part of right from January, or are they at a later stage of the process?
January, and for the most part, even later, as others would be interested, invited, or volunteer.
But the task forces start really in
We need
January.
to get started in January.
My concern is I heard some talk about application forms. I mean, this sounds like a logistical nightmare to me, and I think we should be grateful for anyone willing to give their time here.
Right.
Because we've got, between the Community 2000 that the newspaper's running, plus the language curriculum review, which I think has sucked up a lot of the usual volunteers from the committee. I'm not sure where you find 100 more community people who are going to be able to give that tight of a time frame for the next couple of months.
We'll use the draft.
By the way,
The community draft.
since Greg opened this up, I would like to know too, what balance they anticipate on the action team, since that is.
I'm just concerned you're only going to take the action in another week, and then supposedly in January, you need how many dozen people to start showing up ready to report for duty? That's going to be logistically difficult. If you put a lot of constraints on how you choose them and that sort of thing. So that's why I was curious what the total number of people is that's All right, thank you.
Chuck.
We understand you volunteered.
Hi, it's Chuck Hammond again. I got one quick question, Dr. Bose. If this is an 8-month planning process and we're going to replan this thing every year, who's going to assume this position then the next year and the year after that and what have you? Or are we looking for a permanent planning director at some point?
The major task is getting started, getting from inertia to some movement and culminating with a plan. We will not, after the plan is implemented and as a result of its annual review, we will not need that kind of intensive personnel participation once we have a plan. We may say the plan is good for the second year or the third year. We may do some slight adjustments, some tinkering. That remains to be seen, but it should not be as labor intensive as the launch is.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm pleased to see that we're doing this. Is Dr. Mangano open to people of all experiences?
Absolutely.
Who may be in other states?
Absolutely.
I think that's the most important thing, that she be someone who is approachable.
In fact, I would invite any of you who might be interested from what you've heard or know somebody who might be, to begin calling as early as tomorrow to register your interest and give your name, address, and telephone.
There may be some of us that some people may not want to see on that list, but I'll be glad to see all of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. We're going to get through this tonight.
Almost there, right?
We're going to move into policy. I just have a few comments before we move into policy. I'm going to turn items A and B over to Ken. But before we get to items A and B, I just want to make the comment that after we get through A and B, I'm going to ask Dr. Bose to comment on the last board meeting we had and just bring the board and the community up to date as far as what our solicitor, the opinion he's rendered as far as the hate speech policy. And I believe that Dr. Bose is going to he's going to at least put it on the table on perhaps which way we could move forward on that. So I just wanted to get that out before we move to item A. In saying that, I'll turn it over to Ken on item A.
Thank you. We're scheduled for the first reading of a policy 5147 on the reporting of child abuse. Be reassured that we have had procedures for the reporting of child abuse, and those procedures have been outlined in administrative regulations. Our new requirement is, our additional requirement is to develop procedures for employees to report on any child abuse by other employees. And that is very different from the kinds of procedures that we've had in the past. So the first draft of the board policy for the child abuse reporting refers to two administrative regulations, 5146 and 5147. We're going to have to do some number changing in our administrative regulation book regarding the alignment of policies and regs, and you'll be receiving, board members will be receiving that in their mail on Friday afternoon. But rest assured that we will have all the administrative regulations in order, and this board policy obligates the superintendent to develop those procedures, and so they will be forthcoming. If I can move from that one to the next one, 5152, you'll remember we had a first reading, and I was asked to reschedule this for a second first reading and bring it back with some concerns addressed. We have new language in this weapons on school property policy. You may recall that we said this language is, for the most part, written by the Act and directed by the legislature. At the end of the second paragraph, we have added these words because of your suggestions and your concerns. And instrument or implement capable of and possessed or wielded with the intent of inflicting serious bodily injury. Those words are different from the words you saw in your previous draft. And the final paragraph is all new wording. I needed to read it a couple of times. Nothing in this section should be construed as limiting otherwise existing district policies and procedures regarding student discipline for infractions involving use, as opposed to possession, of weapons, acts causing bodily injury, or other disciplinary infractions. That paragraph is new and has been added upon the advice of counsel since our last discussion. So these two policies are brought forth for their first reading this Thursday evening, the 21st. We would, given the hour, we would welcome your concerns, your questions, and your criticisms of these policies. We have several weeks in which to adjust them and fine-tune them before they are scheduled for adoption in January.
I just have one question, Ken, in the second paragraph. What's a nunchuck?
Nunchuck.
You ever see them nunchucks?
What is it?
The nunchucks. Two sticks and a chain in front of them. You don't watch those.
Haven't you ever watched Kung Fu?
Nunchucks.
You don't watch those shows on Saturday
I learned how to
afternoon.
read by
You just watch
phonics.
those.
Yeah, but now the office next, Dennis.
All right, well, we started on this side.
I'm sorry.
That's all right, Sharice. Did you do anything else?
No, I'd never seen that word before, and I didn't know what it was.
Well, now you know.
It's good you have it.
Mr. White.
Ken, I just wanted to make sure, was the last section that you indicated that was all language, did that have to be inserted because of the words that we put in paragraph 2? Is that why that new paragraph is in? Because my understanding is that this policy, as it was previously brought to us, was word for word what the state requirements were.
It was, but there was, as we talked last time, there was increasing concern that this be compatible, even though we didn't like the wording that came from the state, and even though we were beginning to rewrite the words that came from the state, there was much concern that this be compatible with everything else we had on the books. And I think the attempt of this last paragraph is to give us that compatibility.
Okay, thank you.
Pat.
Just one question, Ken. Fourth paragraph from the bottom, the provisions of this section shall not apply to a weapon being used as being part of a program approved by a school, by an individual who was participating in the program.
If your son were asked to bring your Kentucky, which normally hangs over the fireplace, and show it in social studies class for a discussion of the Kentucky rifle, it would be brought upon request for demonstration or use in a particular program.
My reason for asking was we know about the incident that happened to Votech a few months ago.
Right.
Are we covered or protected? I mean, it was a protractor that is really not considered a weapon, but it was used as a weapon to inflict bodily harm. Are we covered?
I believe that's what the last paragraph is actually balancing out.
Fine.
The last paragraph is helpful there.
That's what I'm concerned about, because a baseball bat could be a weapon.
This could be pretty dangerous,
That's
too. There are
exactly
sharp
right.
edges here.
Exactly. That's my concern. That's all I have.
Okay. John. Bill.
Yes, question. Last sentence of the third paragraph. In conjunction with it says he shall be expelled for a period of 1 year. He, the student. The last sentence says that the superintendent has discretion in that 1 year. Do I understand that correctly? And is that in accordance with the law?
The superintendent does have discretion, and when Mrs. Clark and I met with Ken Roos at length, representing the Potash firm, we discussed and challenged all this. There is some flexibility there, if you will. It's a mandatory 1 year, but the superintendent can come to the board and say there are such extenuating circumstances, there are such unusual, the age of the child. I mean, we're going to be faced with a second grader that brings a penknife to school.
Just my thought, yes.
And when that second grader brings the penknife to school, are we going to expel the child for a year? I hope not, as one individual.
I'm not.
Yeah.
You know, there was an interesting article in the December Journal, and the School Board Journal. It spoke of, I think it was a 12 or 13-year-old out on a field trip realized that he had a penknife in his pocket. And they're talking about the family spent up to $11,000 in psychological as well as legal costs because the child voluntarily turned it over to one of the chaperones on the bus, realizing that they shouldn't have it with them, but it's there, and then the mandatory expulsion took hold.
We pray that reason will prevail.
And I hope that we clarify those still follow-up, Ken, so that we can be proactive on Dr. Bose knowing the process that he has to go through or the board has to go through in order to react to that so that we're not having to face this and then suddenly come up with answers that we're not prepared
And we
for.
remember your requests for notice to students, an article in the student newspapers and such that was discussed last month.
Right. Well, I thank you for some of the changes in the language. I think that does handle the question of the program instruments that become real weapons.
Dick, do you have anything else? Don? Okay, as far as items A and B, are there any comments from the audience? Bob?
Bob Graziano, Tomenson. Nobody mentioned paragraph 4. I'm not sure why it's in there, but somehow I read that somebody could wield a weapon with the intent of inflicting serious bodily injury and somehow be excused because of some disability.
Bob, you really need to look at the severity of the handicapping condition and why a child would bring that in. We have children in this district with all types of disabilities, and we're grateful that the law provides some flexibility in those cases. That's what that's in there for, and it's done specifically for those children.
Right, there is reference to a specific law, and I don't know if that's a section or what that is, but that would be the case that someone could bring a weapon in and inflict injury, but possibly be excused because of that disability?
Well, you're also looking at the special education regulations, and you have to provide a program for a youngster like that. So it gives the superintendent a little bit of flexibility there to look at those cases individually.
Okay, thank you. Just incidentally, I was one who questioned a couple of things last time this was brought up, and this is much better than the last revision. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Greg?
Just very quickly, Dr. Clemens, Mr. Clemens, not Dr. Clemens. Something we talked about last time, I was just curious if we got a clarification on, which is, since this talks about public conveyance, did we find out what our recourse is or liability to private school students who are transported by us? Is that already covered by a policy? What do we do if somebody on one of those rider buses brings a weapon and we can't exactly get them thrown out of their school?
But we can expel them.
Can we expel them from our bus?
Right,
Yes. And that's how it's handled. Okay, so we can stop our liability at that point by refusing them transport from that point forward. And that doesn't conflict with our mandate to provide them transportation to school. They effectively waive that right by
Not
filing.
any more than mandatory attendance is a conflict when a student is up for expulsion.
Okay.
Same rule applies.
Ken, do we have the bill, the weapons bill here? Do we have it in the district itself? The actual legislation?
I don't have it here tonight.
No, but you do have
I
it?
believe it is at my desk, yes.
Okay.
This is taken on.
Could you just forward me a copy of that so I can read the exact language and extent of it, please?
Any other questions or comments from the audience? Say, okay, is there a consensus for readings, for these to go on as readings?
Yes, please.
Yes, please. Okay, 2 more items to cover that aren't on the agenda. I've had some phone calls as board president and conversations with people of where we are going with the hate speech policy. And I think that I should give Dr. Bose a few minutes to bring the community up to date. And then after that, I would like to hand out the committee assignments for the board, and hopefully we can conclude.
Let me begin by suggesting that The policy has every good intention, and as was most recently drafted by Charles Potash, and accompanying the draft was a letter addressed to Mr. Weir with a copy to me, talking about some of the impracticalities of enforcing such a policy. And let me read some of those to you to help explain what I'm prepared to recommend. He suggested such a policy does not violate the First Amendment rights of North Penn educational community, defined as teachers, staff, students, and board members. This policy is merely a statement of what the board believes to be appropriate behavior. If an individual, whether a student, teacher, staff, or board member, is accused of acting in a fashion which is contrary to this policy would merely act as an enhancement of other rules of conduct for teachers and students. Such individuals can only be penalized after examination, including a due process hearing, which where otherwise required, but that is not applicable to board members. And only after that due process is provided to a student or staff member can any penalty be applied. But again, Mr. Potash is reminding us that can apply to board members and certainly can apply to members of the general public in a meeting like this who might say something that was unacceptable. And what he's suggesting is that, quote, many states, including Pennsylvania, have enacted criminal hate, crime, ethnic intimidation statutes. Our research has turned up that there are 20 states. Many of these statutes, including Pennsylvania's, are enhancement statutes. If the individual's conduct, coupled with the conduct that violates this policy, is found to be in violation of the school code, this policy would only serve as a possible enhancement of existing disciplinary remedies. In other words, those statutes make it a crime to engage in intimidating or hate speech type activity. And what he's saying is there already is a penalty for that. It's in the statute enacted by our state and in this case 19 other states. So he's saying essentially it's unenforceable, and what he suggested in the latest version is what I would call maybe a statement of philosophy or a statement of principle without the due process or the penalty features, which are impractical and perhaps unenforceable as it applies to the board itself or members of the general public. There are already rules and regulations that cover student behavior and staff behavior, which can be applied in penalty form as an aftermath of a due process proceeding. But let me read an excerpt from the latest draft of the policy that he recommends. Maybe it's best if I read the whole thing. It is the policy of this board of directors that a comprehensive education should include the development of respect for all individuals regardless of race, color, creed, national origin, age, gender, or handicap. Board members also believe that as leaders elected by the community and as officials of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, they bear a responsibility by example and by law to ensure that all conduct by board members, administrators, staff, and students respects the law and upholds a philosophy of mutual respect. Board members recognize that regardless of intent, racial, ethnic, and/or sexual slurs, hate speech, or group defamation have the capacity of substantially harming both the individuals to whom slurs are addressed and the educational community as a whole. Furthermore, the board affirms the right of all students and staff to be protected from intimidation, discrimination, physical harm, and harassment, which includes comments, name-calling, physical conduct, or other expressive behavior directed at an individual or group that demeans the race, color, religion, national origin, gender, or handicapping condition of that individual or individuals, or which creates an intimidating, hostile, or demeaning environment for education. So this is somewhat like a bully pulpit. It's a statement of what ought to be. And it does not reflect the course of action that, as he's already indicated, is impractical, if not impossible, or might be covered by statutes that already exist in our state, and as well as 19 others, to cover such behavior and provide a process for those who have a complaint, for their complaint to be heard. I'm suggesting that the Board of Education include maybe a portion of this that speaks to its intent and the standard it wants to raise in this community and for itself and all those associated with it, in addition to that statement that the board consider adopting a code of ethics. Many boards of education adopt a code of ethics that takes the high road. It talks about what the board members hold as a high standard for their own conduct, promises they make about how they will do the business of the public and to conduct themselves as board members. I'm somewhat familiar with it because I worked for a Board of Education before coming to North Penn that adopted such a policy in 1979 and never had to consider any incident where any board member stepped out beyond what the Code of Ethics defined as proper, public, and responsible conduct. I'm suggesting that the Board of Education consider adopting such a policy, and I'll provide a draft to the board to do so with a feature of it containing Potash's suggestion for the kind of philosophical statement the policy I read proposes. And that might be the way the board deals with the issue, takes a strong stand on it, but avoids the entanglement of something that may be impossible to enforce.
No, we're out of time. Change the tape? Yeah.
Close the meeting.
Okay. With Dr. Bose's statement, as board president, I haven't really known what direction to take. Obviously, at the last meeting, it was somewhat of an emotional meeting with Mr. Potash's resignation. A lot of things happened quickly, but basically at that meeting, I felt he said that this is a policy that we really can't enforce, and I think that message got through to all the board members. To handle it in what I think is the fairest way, and in saying that, that is the way that I would like to proceed, but I do feel I need to ask the board, are there any objections to proceeding that way? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to direct Dr. Bose to move forward at that. Now I'm going to move on to the board liaison.
I'm just a little fuzzy on that.
Okay.
To proceed with the policy or to proceed with the drafting of a code of ethics?
I'm going to direct Dr. Bose to proceed to work with Don, to work with what he said of taking what he read as far as what Mr. Potash's final opinion was and blending that in with a potential code of ethics for school board members.
Thank you.
Which would become policy if you adopt it.
Okay, great.
I'd just like to say, when I read that and I saw the hate crime legislation, yes, there is hate crime legislation, but about 1.5 years ago was when it was a highly controversial bill for hate speech at the state level, and it did not pass. And speech is not a synonym for crime in the state of Pennsylvania. So I think the semantics indicate that there is a bill that has legal or legislation behind it for hate speech, but I don't believe that there is. Because I remember that one. You remember when we went through this area.
But, okay, any other comments, questions?
Sure.
Okay, assignments. We have enough copies for the audience, correct? Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'll read them while we pass them out, yes. As far as assignments for community services and policy, I'm going to ask that Don Hill would be the liaison, with Pat Mosey being the alternate. For elementary education, I'm asking Bill Allen to be the liaison, with Sharice Krieger as the alternate. For facilities, buildings, and grounds, I'm asking John Schilling to be the liaison, with Bill Allen as the alternate. For finance, I'm asking Vicky Scher to be the liaison with Don Hill as the alternate. For personnel, I'm asking Donna Mengel to be the liaison with Tom Clemens as the alternate. For secondary education, I'm asking Pat Mosey to be the liaison with John Schilling being the alternate. As you move down on the sheet, and I'd like to clarify this for the audience because it was something I really wasn't real sure of as I became a new board member. Now as we move down, there are just differences of how the committee's set up. For special ed and student services, Sharice Krieger will be the liaison with Donna Mengel as the alternate. In the past, excuse me, I need to finish support services yet. Support services, I'm asking David Whites as the liaison with Pat Mosey as the alternate. I got a little ahead of myself. Now, let's get on to legislative. Donna Mengel and Vicky Scher will serve as a team on legislative. In the past, in Merck Science Partnership, David Whites was the sole person responsible. I'm asking David Whites to bring on board John Schilling to be co-liaisons for Merck Science Partnership. Long-range planning, as was asked earlier by Mrs. Krieger, perhaps we should have 4 people on as far as the strategic plan. I've included myself, I've included Donna Mengel, the Vice President, I've included Vicky Scher as the liaison of finance. I've also included David Whites as being part of the Merck Science Partnership in their strategic planning, and also with David's expertise in support services. So we do have 4 people on what I would call the team on long-range planning. For municipal relations, that will consist of a team of Don Hill and Vicky Scher. Pardon me?
Go ahead.
Okay. Meet and discuss will consist of a team of Tom Clemens and Don Hill. And I think that Meet and Discuss has been a committee that's kind of died off, for lack of better words, and we'd like to get that Meet and Discuss going again, get the dialogue going again with the Teachers Association. So we want to try to get that going again. And finally, the North Monco AVTS, I perhaps need to be helped out on this a little bit. I believe Bill Allen, Donna Mengel are appointments that terms need to be finished. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to appoint Pat Mosey to fill Ralph Reckhamp's unexpired term for North Monco AVTS. Now, you will see another item on here, or you won't see an item that did appear on the past and it disappeared for a while, and that was the representative to the Montgomery County IU. I would like to be able to appoint, and I've talked with Sharice Krieger to that position. In the past, Dick Bowman has filled that position. I believe Ken needs to get in touch with, maybe you have today, or maybe you could comment on, I do believe you did talk with Denny Harkin this afternoon, and you could at least update us as to what has to happen there as far as January.
We need to submit a nominee for election to the IU board in January. And you know that we have weight in that,
right,
given our numbers, and so the chances are very good for our nominee to be elected. There's no reason to think that our nominee would not be elected. So there is paperwork. Actually, it will be with your packets on Friday. You have the forms and the letter from the IU on that regard. You'll have it on Friday.
I just need to ask one question, Ken. What day of the week do they meet?
Every night.
Thank you, Don. I can't do it.
It's once a month.
Well, I know, but
I think it's a Tuesday.
I thought it was one Tuesday a month.
I believe it's a Tuesday, one Tuesday a month.
Okay.
And this was an assignment that I believe Dick took on. I don't know how it happened before Dick was board president. Was Pat Davis the liaison before Dick?
I thought it was
don't
Burkowski.
know.
Wasn't it Burkowski?
No, I think
it was just something Dick did.
It was just something that Dick did. Well, then I would.
Dick had done it once.
He was doing it before he became president, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so he continued to do it.
And he just said, I guess I'll just keep doing it if there were no objections. It was not a precedent.
You will have all the paperwork for Sharice's election to that board on Friday in your mail.
Is that 1 year? Are they elected every year? I thought that Dick just went through an election and just got elected while he was in the midst of moving to Colorado. Dick went through and we had a vote on him this June, and it was like, as a matter of fact, by the time the election took place, he was already out of here. Not if he hadn't officially resigned, but,
Well, I'd like to
and I
turn-
thought it was
I
for.
think
You should come back.
My recollection was nobody else volunteered.
I know.
Why is that?
But I mean,
Because it's
doesn't he
another
still
night.
have an open term?
I'll turn it over to Ken and let
Denny
Ken
Harkin.
handle it.
We will talk with Denny Harkin again. It's my understanding that we should have a new person elected in January.
I didn't even think they were taking their elections, because I thought they went through the whole process.
I have the forms in your tray.
Okay, I appreciate
Getting
that.
close to that hour, 11:30. Vicki?
We will need to put on the North Monto ABTS on the action meeting for it to be official. That is one that you have to go through a board vote
Oh, okay.
for the VOTEC assignment, as you would for the IU also.
Yes.
That requires a board vote at the time for
Thank you.
the application. And on the municipal relations, in the past, there's been 3 people assigned to that committee. I would suggest if you're looking, maybe Pat perhaps with his involvement with municipal or someone else. The other suggestion I would say came from something Bill said a few days ago. It was dealing with Ryder and the private school busing, and I kind of thought we might want to give some consideration to having a non-public school liaison committee of the board, not one that would necessarily meet monthly, but in those hot months of August and September, when you're dealing with the startup of the year, get the concerns of those parents which we may be out of touch with, develop a relationship and a communication level there. It may be a meeting that's 3 or 4 times in the entire year. But we might want to look to develop something like that, a connection between the non-public parents.
Okay. Sort of like a non-public liaison.
Non-public school parents. School liaison.
Any other, hey.
Motion to adjourn.
Dr. Bose would like to make one more comment before we adjourn.
Ask the board members if you've received personal invitations to a dinner at North Monco.
Yes.
Okay, I thought the contact was with you directly, because I know it didn't come through me. Okay, so you
Sitting with the
RSVP,
Moses.
did you get
Cool.
It's a dinner for you and an explanation of their expansion program.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
All in favor, aye.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
The audience says aye.